I'd like to call this meeting of the Urbana City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Here.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Present.
Mr. Hayes? Ms. Pat?
Present.
Mr. Roberts?
Present.
Mr. Whalen?
Aye.
Ms. Wyman?
Present.
Mayor Satterthwaite?
Here. We have a quorum. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? Can you hear me now?
Hello?
I think we're going now. Okay. See, first item on our agenda this evening is approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. Is there a motion?
Move approval. Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Any additions or corrections? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Any additions or corrections to the agenda this evening? Seeing none, we'll go to petitions and communications. If anybody would like to speak to the council for a period of up to 5 minutes, if you fill out one of these white cards at the back of the room and bring it up to myself or the clerk, and you'll get a chance to do so. Before we do that, though, we have a presentation to a couple of our Public Works employees. I don't know how many of you read about this in the paper, but it was a couple of weeks ago. A couple of our Public Works employees went out to the Salt Dome, which we share with a couple other governmental entities, and found a delivery man that was delivering salt to the dome, had gotten in an accident, and was 3/4 covered by a mound of salt and stuck there without being able to move. And so our two employees, Calvin Peacock and Eric Hagerman, saw the unfortunate fellow there and helped dig him out of this salt mound. And if it weren't for them noticing his plight, why, he might have been there for quite some time on a cold winter day. And so I'd like to thank both Calvin and Eric, and if you come up here, I've got a certificate of appreciation for both of you. It says City of Urbana Certificate of Appreciation awarded to Eric Hagerman and Calvin Peacock in recognition of service to the City of Urbana and its citizens for his rescue efforts on January 14th, 2005. And we've got with Calvin and Eric a veteran employee. Calvin, how long have you been with the city? 26 years. Eric, how long have you been with the city?
Going on 4, sir.
Going on 4 years. So we've got a veteran and a relatively new employee, and they were at the right place at the right time for that young man that was covered in salt. So thanks again. So we'll get started with public participation. First is Bill Bagby of 2314 North High Cross Road on the comprehensive plan. And he's going to be followed by Bjorg Holte. Okay.
Hello. This thing working? Guess so. I'm Bill Bagby. And even though I've sold my home that I built on West Nevada Street, I really feel strongly a part of this community, and very proud and very happy to actually be living here. We've got a lot of accomplishments. I'm here tonight as myself, but also as a member of the rural group. We live in this no man's land called the ETJ, the extraterritorial jurisdiction, where this mile and a half, we're subject to a lot of the zoning regulations, and what you do, but we don't get to vote for city council. We don't get to vote for the mayor. It's not exactly taxation without representation, but something like that. So we're here because in a few weeks, you'll be receiving a comprehensive plan from the steering committee. And rather than showing up on that evening, we thought it would be better for us to come tonight and give you some information that maybe you might not be aware of. This will greatly affect our lives. And there are certain items in this plan that could be disastrous. Overall, the comprehensive plan, I read the thing cover to cover, and I mentioned this to the steering committee the other night, that if we could accomplish even half of what's in that plan, it's an amazing achievement. There's a lot of great stuff in that plan. I brought a copy of the EPA's 10 Smart Growth Principles, which I handed out. You probably have those in front of you. Most of that is actually in the plan, and it's very encouraging. Goals 1 through 18 reflect the smart development strategies, preserving neighborhoods, conserving energy. Libby even mentioned at the steering committee meeting to include the LEED standards, which I don't know if you're aware of. This is environmental and ecological standards for energy efficiency that now the city of Chicago has adopted for most new buildings and rehabs. It's a way of rating how the effect of energy efficiency really is coming across. There's things in the plan like reduce automobile dependence, protect air, water, wooded areas, calls for more parks, trees, and trails. These are wonderful goals. Number 15 goal is to encourage compact, contiguous, and sustainable growth objective, even though Rob doesn't seem to know beyond Webster's definition of what sustainable means. 15.1 shows to avoid leapfrog development around the perimeter of town where we live. 16.2 is to preserve agricultural lands and environmentally sensitive areas outside the city. Then you have promoting infill development rather than greenfield development. These are wonderful goals. Everything was quite admirable and inspiring until I got to 49.2. I was shocked. It reads, create a ring of higher speed corridors around the urbanized area. Of course, the name was changed. It's no longer called a ring road after we complained to Kuwats. Now it's something like a high-speed limited access perimeter road, but it's still the same thing. I'm sorry, but this is in direct conflict with almost every one of the wonderful goals in the comprehensive plan. 15 to 16, smart growth. 17 to 18, infill, not greenfield development. Number 21, goal 23, 28, 29, 30, 46, 48. I'm not sure if any of you have really looked at that or if any of you have the facts on this type of road, but I'll tell you, faster, larger perimeter roads through our countryside clearly encourage auto travel and will increase our dependency on them, not decrease it. Worse yet, it creates a haven for criminals to access all areas and then disappear with ease. Not to mention all the road chemicals and salt and 24-hour noise and pollution for those of us that live out there. Ring roads have systematically destroyed towns almost everywhere they have appeared. Even when cities have been able to annex property to increase the tax base to properties adjacent to ring roads for development purposes, it's always been at the expense of in-town properties. And just please do your homework on this point is all I'm here to ask, because this is something that you don't need to take my word for. There's tons of information out there. And I'm here tonight to ask you to please do not approve cutting through the countryside for whatever desperately needed tax revenue that we could have that could easily be generated in town. And I don't have some kind of personal vendetta here tonight. I'm actually uncomfortable talking in front of groups and don't like having to be here to do this at all. I'm basically here for my children and my grandchildren and yours as well. And there are ways to solve this problem without us having to tear up the countryside and put in new roads and destroy nice wooded areas, ecological areas that don't exist, the last of the vestige of the big grove, which is there. And I'm also here to report to you that the experience and training of many of those whom you have entrusted with developing this comprehensive plan may not be relevant for this project. And I think it's time to get creative and think out of the box, out of the traditional. And that does not mean fiscal irresponsibility. In other words, doing something new does not mean taking a risk anymore. You can easily find somebody online or on the phone or some city that's already taken the risk for you, and all you got to do is look at the results. We can see what works and what doesn't work, and I'm hoping that that's what you'll do, and that's the key. And if we could set aside our preconceived ideas and some of our training that might not be relevant, you can just look at what works and what doesn't work. And I know my 5 minutes is up.
Time is up.
So, instead of reading to you the other two things, you can read them. They're in front of you. These are a couple of really out-of-the-box things, but they work. There's examples in Europe, in the Netherlands, and also in Groningen and in Belgium, town of Hasselt, that have basically torn up most of their roads and put in bicycle paths because the cost of subsidizing buses and providing for bicycles is way cheaper than roads. So I would hope that you would look at that, and thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question, if you'd entertain it.
Sure.
Are you, I'm sorry, in your introduction, you said you were a member. Are you speaking on behalf of this rural group?
Not on behalf, there's two others that will speak as well.
Okay,
but
I'd like-
I am speaking on behalf of the people who signed the petition that you have in front of you. And I'd like
Okay.
to also say that these are not people that signed a petition to get us off their porch. This is 95% of the residents who were happy as can be to see us. 95% of the residents in the area of what's called the Kuwats High Cross Corridor Study. All are opposed to this.
And my question, and how about if I go ahead and ask it, and then you can decide whether it's something that should
Sure.
be maybe addressed to one of the later speakers. We've heard a lot about this on the Plan Commission, obviously, which was my previous gig. And the question I have for you is would you characterize the primary concern of the homeowners in this area as making sure that if traffic is increased north of the interstate, that it not be done on North High Cross Road, or that if traffic, or that there not be a higher volume north-south corridor north of the interstate at all, or that the interchange here not be reconfigured, even if essentially all the traffic that was coming off this interchange were diverted around to go south on Route 130. And I think you understand what I'm getting at. One of the suggestions that was proposed at one point was that if this interchange were to be extended, that it be extended to the east, curve to the south, and essentially be an extension of Route 130. So you come north on High Cross Road over the interstate and then basically be, turned to this interchange, and that North High Cross Road remain, if you were coming to the north and curving around, you'd essentially have to, for example, turn right to go up North High Cross Road, and that would remain kind of a rural road. So if we were to put priorities on those three items of basically fighting the expansion of North High Cross Road, fighting the creation of any north-south corridors north of the interstate, or fighting the reconfiguration of this interchange such that traffic might go to the north rather than to the south as it does now. Can you give us a feel on how your petitioners would rate the relative importance of those issues?
I could tell you we discussed this a lot, and we discussed several different options, and I can only speak for myself and for what we are able to agree on, which is the verbiage in the petition. The first paragraph of the petition basically says, no new roads, no extension of the interstate, no ring road concept, no new roads. Let's encourage infill development. Let's work in downtown. Let's work in the areas that are ghost areas right now, which I think most of the people are here tonight to speak about, so I don't want to take any more time. Let's not go and cut up the countryside. So my feel for the group is that the extension of the interstate overpass over to High Cross Road is the first step in the wrong direction of creating a ring road, of creating a road because it's going to encourage traffic out there, and there's no need to encourage traffic out there. It's not going to help anything. It's going to attract development and corporations of the worst type, and they're the only ones that are going to benefit. Everybody else is going to lose. The tax base is going to erode in the center of town. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I would say try to ask that of somebody else as well.
Okay,
Not
well,
just- not just me.
appreciate the input.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the time.
Okay, next is Bjorg Holte. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Okay. 1001 North High Cross Road. After that will be George Boyd.
Good evening. I'm Bjorg Holte. I would also like to start saying that I'm very impressed with the new 2005 Comprehensive Plan and all the work that went into making it. I know this plan has been 4 years in the making, with monthly Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee meetings open to the public. I have attended most of them and have learned a lot from these meetings. I live in Northeast Urbana, and I'm quite pleased to see that the new comprehensive plan has on its future land use map allocated a large area north of I-74, both east and west of High Cross Road, as rural residential, which I think is very befitting of that area. But I'm here tonight to also speak to the issue of the access road, which would connect the University Avenue and I-74 interchange to High Cross Road between Anthony Drive and Perkins Road. I'm going to read the letter, one of the letters we have submitted to you tonight, so the audience can hear it as well. To all council members, we are providing each of you with a copy of this memorandum and enclosures expressing the views of a large group of citizens in the county northeast of Urbana, primarily in the Kuatz Route 130 High Cross Road study area. As you well know, Kuatz was solicited for the study by the City of Urbana, and the results of their study is reflected in your 2005 Comprehensive Plan. In June of 2004, members of our group submitted a petition addressed to Kuatz stating the position of this area's residents on their road proposals. Copies of this petition were sent to all Kuatz member agencies and Urbana Mayor Todd Satterthwaite. We are enclosing a copy of the petition. We are doing this to reiterate the fact that we still have the same objections to these proposals in our home areas. Restricting our petition drive to property owners within the Kuatz study area north of Route 150 and centered on and around High Cross Road, a group of us gathered 302 signatures in a 4-day period. We are also enclosing a map section derived from the 2005 Comprehensive Plan road map to specifically point out the proposed Trumpet Road or extension from the intersection of East Urbana Avenue with I-74 to High Cross Road. This plan, although in your thoughts for many years, offers no advantage to providing better access to the Route 150 and Illinois 130 road intersection. The existing Route 150 highway connection with East Urbana Avenue to I-74 is less than 1,000 feet farther than the proposed extension road. Route 150 has been a state highway for in excess of 80 years and has in the last 2 years been repaved and improved. It is completely compatible with highway use. It is a highway. Development along it is reflective of a state highway. To propose a new road forged through areas where people live and work for a very high expense will not save time in transit compared to the existing route. If the sight lines along the proposed route, I-74 Overpass Hill and the hills on High Cross, are considered, it will be a more dangerous route and any predicted time savings will not happen. Please study the enclosed map data. Both the proposed extension from I-74 and the Ring Road Arterial Fringe Road concept proposal lack fiscal and practical responsibility. Studies have shown that ring roads result in decay of inner communities, create urban sprawl, and fiscally their costs cannot be offset by resulting taxation. The cost of construction, providing services, and maintenance would result in a financial loss. We estimate the cost for the intersection at I-74, the extension construction, and the widening and changes to High Cross Road and overpass would exceed $60 million. As responsible stewards of the rural countryside we choose to live in, we adamantly oppose the changes that have been submitted. Our group has already made other suggestions to CUATS and the City of Urbana planners to offer alternatives. Respectfully submitted on behalf of the Rural Preservation Group.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions?
I would ask if you'd like to field the question that I addressed to the previous speaker in terms of priorities for the organization.
Okay.
Whether the concern is essentially increased traffic on North High Cross Road, increased traffic north of the interstate at all in the guise of this sort of ring road notion, or reconfiguration of the University Avenue interchange, even if the primary purpose of that reconfiguration was to direct traffic south onto High Cross Road rather than north. Do you have a feel for sort of how the people in your area would prioritize those three objections?
I think that most people are thinking that if an access road comes onto High Cross, that's the beginning of the end of our beautiful countryside out there. And that's the beginning of slicing and dicing up the area east and north. And the north of I-74 on High Cross going up is such a beautiful, environmentally fragile area, and any kind of road widening, more use of trucks, pollution, etc., will just destroy that area.
So the argument is it safe to characterize your argument as concern that expansion of that interchange would result in increased development north of the interstate?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next is George Boyd. Also wants to speak on the comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Mayor Satterthwaite and council members. First of all, thank you, and I appreciate the time you've given me tonight to speak. I, too, am representing people northeast of Urbana. Not actually northeast of Urbana, but out in the county northeast of Urbana, just to be specific. I'd like to comment on the maps we gave you. You should have received two maps. One map is with regard to the extension that Mr. Alex has asked about several times. And the other map is another proposal if you did need a road for high-speed transit around the community, which we don't believe you do anytime in the near future. To all council members, the attached map area enlarged from your own comprehensive plan 2005 illustrates our contention of the mistaken belief that there will be a great savings of time and distance by spending tens of millions of tax dollars in modifying the existing I-74 intersection with East University Avenue near Flexengate connecting to High Cross Road. Keeping in mind the two major points, and I'd appreciate it if you could kind of follow this on your map. A and C, you will find that the proposed future improvement is no better than the state highway Route 150, an existing available shorter route connecting points A and C via point B. The proposed route connecting points A and C through point D is only 1,000 feet shorter, using distances measured on your own maps. The time saved on a distance of 1,000 feet at an average speed of 40 miles per hour is 17 seconds. The actual posted highway speed on Route 150 is 45 miles per hour, already reducing the time saved to 15 seconds. The Route 150 connection has been completely repaved, widened, and improved in the last few years and is in use now. Further, the land use along Route 150 is typical of a state highway in service for 80 years. Visibility is good to avoid accidents, whereas the proposed route has poor visibility on High Cross Road due to the hill over Route I-74, and a second hill between Anthony Drive and the junction of High Cross Road and the suggested road extension. Anthony Drive and the junction of High Cross Road and the suggested interchange road extension. It would also extend through an area that is vegetated, has existing residential uses, and is frequented by wildlife, which would result in more animal vehicle accidents, particularly at night. It is an impractical idea, and this, coupled with the extensive cost, would result in an irresponsible decision. We are also enclosing a second map. While we oppose a ring road, fringe arterial road, high-speed corridor, or any other description of this type, we do offer this map as an alternative. And I'd like to interject that if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. I don't care how many times they attempt to change the name from Ring Road to something else. The 1800 East suggestion affords an effort to use existing roads, connects and balances proposals to the east or to the west and south of the communities, and it would not impact the last vestige of the Big Grove area and the valuable saline greenbelt, which is a habitat to countless wildlife species, many already in peril. We recommend that each of you take a weekend drive through these areas and see for yourself Curtis Road, 1800 East, and Olympian. Look 20 years into the future and protect our agricultural and environmental assets for future generations. Please leave a legacy of responsibility when you retire from this job. And I think I have a couple minutes left.
Well, looks like about a minute, George.
Okay, well, I have left for 1 minute. I think that if you go out and drive around, you will actually see what we're talking about. We're not opposed to proper residential growth in the area. We just don't want to see a steamroller group of people come in there, developers, and use up the valuable farmland. There are many issues involved. The farmland, the destruction of the tiles, making it impossible for the farmers that are left to properly drain their fields. And it wouldn't lead to anything but chaos out in that area. The green belt out there is, with brownfield woods and trellis woods, is invaluable to this community. There is a Legacy Act that was passed by the State of Illinois legislature, which became effective on January 1st last year. And unfortunately, the state hasn't provided money to enact it, but you should read it and see what it says, because it will lend a lot of credence to what we're saying. And thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, George. Yes, Ms. Chandler?
It's, George, if you would take a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
Have you, or the rural residential group that prepared this petition, have you had any contact at all with the state of Illinois, and do you have a sense that it's their intention to take the property north of I-74 by eminent domain?
We haven't reached that point. We have met with IDOT.
You have met with IDOT?
Our group had a meeting with IDOT. We've met with City of Urbana planners and developers, and also Senator Rick Winkle and Representative Naomi Jacobson. And we've done our very best to contact people. We got on board late for this. They had a several-year head start before we even found out about this ring road suggestion. And so we've had to really, really work hard to get on board. We've talked to the Farm Bureau. We've talked to PACC Environmental Group. There's a report out by the Champaign County Blue Ribbon Panel on the Environment, which is going to be discussed the 15th of this month at the county board meeting. I would suggest you all look into that and read it and read their recommendations. There's a lot of good stuff there. This Legacy Act, as I said, refers to any community in the state of Illinois. And it's something that the city or the county could set up on their own without state funding. But it would require some money and effort to do it.
And just a quick follow-up question, and a note on that, which is that I personally, as a council member, only heard about the ring road concept within the last year, really within the last 6 to 8 months. But my question is how many properties, individual properties, are north of I-74 that are in the path of this proposed interchange with I-74? Do you know?
It's not a matter of how many properties are in the immediate roadway. If you look at the QATS information, what they're talking about doing is using this for freight. They're talking about semis running through there 24 hours a day to supply service to Walmart or whatever. The point we're trying to make with this is, and you have the map, look at the map yourself. Go out and measure the distance yourself. There is no real difference. A semi negotiating the hill over I-74, if you've ever driven a truck, it's a hill. And the 15 seconds you think you're going to save is going to be utilized going up the hill, and then there's another hill. It also provides very poor sight lines. If you're driving a vehicle and you're trying to look ahead, or you're trying to pull out from the side and turn, you can't see the other people coming until the very last minute. It's going to result in accidents. So there is no real benefit to this. If you have an extra $60 million, or wherever you get the money from, you know, tax money is tax money, whether it comes from the federal government or where it comes from. It's in short supply. And do you really want to waste it on something that won't produce any results?
Good point. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Boyd?
You want to answer the 3 questions?
Well, you know, your question was, I'm not sure it was one question. It was very long.
It was just basically, I'm just trying to get a sense for, I mean, I'll share a little bit of my personal feeling on this from having heard about this on Plan Commission for years. And I mean, the CUATS has been talking about, you know, ring roads around Champaign-Urbana, I think probably as long as there's been a CUATS. And, you know, if you'll notice, we don't have one yet. And quite frankly, based on how much anything like that's going to cost, I think it'll be a pretty darn long time before any of this is anything other than entertainment for transportation planners. But I think something that I have heard, you know, some make a reasonably good case for is this issue of getting traffic that's using South High Cross Road, and by South High Cross Road I mean south of Route 150, onto the interstate in a more efficient manner. And you may not, I mean, your 17-second argument is pretty compelling. Obviously, if you look at this from the map, it's not a whole lot longer regardless of which way you go around. But I think what I'm trying to get at with my questions is, it seems like the concerns that have been brought before the Plan Commission on this have really focused less on how people get on and off the interstate than on protecting North High Cross Road, north of the interstate, and more specifically north of Perkins Road. And quite frankly, I mean, you live up there, you know how difficult it would be to widen that road to even be a decent 2-lane road, let alone a 4-lane road. I mean, there's property built up on both sides. There's brownfield woods. There's a lot of environmentally sensitive areas. It's you know, if you've driven up there during an ice storm, you'll know it's, you know, not a real wide road as it is. I think any argument that North High Cross Road is going to someday be a super highway is probably, in the event that CUATS thinks that's going to happen, I think they're dreaming. I think the primary priority would be to get, if it was to do anything, would be, you know, to look at this interchange. And so the question I've been asking people is is the objection to the notion of reconfiguring the interchange, even if it only gets people south on High Cross Road, or is the concern for High Cross Road north of the interstate? And it seems to me that most of the people who have talked to me about this have been concerned about High Cross Road and the surrounding areas north of the interstate.
Well, certainly people from our group are concerned about that because that's where we live. There has been growth out there. There's been a lot of growth. And it's been done in a responsible manner so far. You have to look at the actual statistics for the population of Champaign-Urbana and Champaign County over the long term. The projections that QATS makes, and there was an editorial letter in the paper here a couple weeks ago written by a doctor who has a veterinarian clinic up on Route 45. And back in the 70s, QATS, or not QATS per se, but regional planning, suggested that the population of Champaign-Urbana by 2000 would be 280,000. It isn't there. The population growth in Urbana over the last 30 years is like barely anything. In the last 10 years, it was 0. that Champaign County, as a part of the state, hasn't really grown in 30 or 40 years. These projections are wild. They're unrealistic. And if you base your projections on things like that, you don't come up with the right answers. Our objection, having lived out there, certainly we're concerned about the growth north of Route 150. But this extension is totally preposterous if you study that map. If you drive at the legal speed limit along there, it's 15 seconds. And there is absolutely no reason by the time a truck or traffic would negotiate those two hills that you're talking about and come through that wooded area where, visibility is poor, you're not going to save any time at all. And you're already dealing with existing highways. As far as the ring road, or whatever you want to call it is, the 1800 East, if you go out and drive that, there's an existing exchange over the possibility of an exchange at Route 74 already there. The road goes over 74. You can easily put a diamond intersection there. This would benefit people coming from the east primarily. But if you look at it realistically, if you think a Walmart store out there or anything else is going to be serviced by people coming from the west quadrants, you're mistaken. Because they're going to be coming from the east. You've already got, now you're going to have another super Walmart in Rantoul, one in Champaign, one in Savoy, and you're proposing and going to build one in Urbana. Who's going to come to it? Not the people from Mahomet or Rantoul or Dewey or Fisher or anywhere out there. They're going to come from the other direction.
I think it tells you something that Walmart, as far as I know, when they chose that land, did not expect there to be an interchange there. I think one of the things these stores look at is there enough traffic count to sustain the property, and they seem to like that intersection the way it was. So I think that's maybe an argument that you can, take to heart in the fact that if the argument was nobody's going to develop, that all this land is never going to be developed unless somebody builds an interchange there, I think it's been demonstrated that that's not the case.
Well,
so
maybe
that's an argument in your favor.
One more comment with regard. I think one of our members heard on the radio this morning going to talk about the Philo Road area. That's where this Aldi store should be built. In the Philo Road area, you have many elderly citizens. There's Florida House, Clark Lindsay, Steer Place, Eagle Ridge facility for elderly people. Those people depended on Kmart and the stores that were out there, and that's where you need development of that type. When you turn things into communication centers and things like that, you're not producing anything they can benefit from. Those people out there who have limited ability to get to stores and things need more help. And that isn't part of our agenda, but that's...
Well, it's my ward, so I agree with you. I think
just a comment.
If we could tell the businesses where to go, we'd be in a much better position.
I've read articles. What has to happen is the planning people have to go out and solicit the types of businesses you want. You have to develop a theme for your community. And that's what you have to go and seek people who want to fulfill that dream that you establish. That's what has to be done, not wait for somebody to come and knock on your door.
Well, and just to be fair, comprehensive planning is a big part of that. And so I think the comments we're getting tonight is very valuable because they're helping steer the direction of this comprehensive plan.
I agree with everybody else. I think you've done a great job on the comprehensive plan. If you want to make us happy, eliminate all of the proposed future roads northeast of Urbana, out in the countryside. Get them off the table, and then we'll be happy.
Let me ask you one more question, because everybody says that, so I'm going to ask you one more question about that. We've seen area plans that indicate there's considerable interest, and I apologize to people in the audience. I know there's a lot of people who want to speak, but I think we're getting to an interesting point here. And there's been proposals for a lot of development of residential property on Airport Road into the south area of Airport Road. I mean, we saw at one point the Plan Commission saw an area plan of sort of what that would look like if that entire triangle between Brownfield Airport and Route 45 and the interstate were, someday full of houses. And obviously we both know it's going to be a long time before anything like that happens, if ever. But if there were that volume of people living up there off of Airport Road, one thing that I can see being an issue is I think it's clear that High Cross Road in its current form and probably even in its current width of that right-of-way is not going to be sufficient to carry the volume of traffic that you're going to generate from people living up there trying to get to the south without improvement to that. So I would think that's part of the thing that's been sort of an issue. Obviously, people want to preserve High Cross Road and, quite frankly, realize that there's not a whole lot of option. I mean, there's not enough right-of-way. There's not enough, probably money in the world to significantly buy up all the property that have to be bought up to really make High Cross Road wider. I mean, I think to some extent it's going to stay the way it is because it has to. But one concern is kind of, how do you or your group feel about the possibility of considerable residential development up along Airport Road? Obviously, you like living up there. There's a lot of other people who'd like living up there, and there's developers who are interested in building up there. I understand your objection to using High Cross Road or building more roads up there as ring roads or ways to carry semis or traffic that you don't think sort of should be in the neighborhood. But as that neighborhood continues to grow and you get more and more homes out there, how do you propose that would you feel that your group's stance at some point would be that you're going to be coming back to us in 20 or 30 or 40 years and saying, we got to do something about High Cross Road, it's too narrow, it's too dangerous, there's too many people trying to use it, whereas now it's kind of the opposite problem. Can you ever see that happening?
Well, I can almost guarantee you that in 20 or 30 years I won't be coming back to you for anything. And most of the people that are involved in our group, we have a lot of elderly people out there. The University of Illinois was established as an agricultural college. Morrow Platts, which is long-standing in the communities over there at the University of Illinois, and is well recognized. The Department of Agriculture over the University of Illinois still has much influence at the University of Illinois. And as Howard Wakeman pointed out at a comprehensive steering committee meeting the other day, the University of Illinois is a 4.9, I think he said, 4.5 or 9 billion dollar enterprise in the communities. That is the major enterprise here. The primary occupation out there in that area you're discussing is agriculture. Agricultural land is being lost every day, decimated, for no necessary reason. And that's why, if you look at the suggestions people have made and look at the community as a whole, and I've heard Mr. Kowalski talk and make good arguments for building inside the city, but I was born in Urbana, right up here on Vine Street, about 2 or 3 blocks from here. I've lived here a long time. My father was born here in Urbana, in what you call historic East Urbana, along with his 5 brothers. My grandfather, on my father's side, came here in 1890. We are not newcomers to the community. And I've seen the community change a lot. And by the same token, I can see very little change. Back in the 1950s, there were about 25,000 people here. Now there's 37,000. Do you call that growth? I'm sorry, a lot of that is just people associated with the University of Illinois. It's grown too. So there is no major growth. There's no major industry here. And these spin-off ideas from the University Research Park aren't going to materialize. If people get a good idea associated with computers or something, they move to California, Arizona, or somewhere else. And I know people that have associated with that type of industry. So I wish Urbana all the luck in the world. And I no longer feel like I'm living in Urbana. I'm not living in Urbana. Champaign County Zoning, who's trying to redo their entire county zoning plan, is really who has jurisdiction over us at this point. And what I'm asking is that when you come to vote on this, that you eliminate the proposed road net out there in our area, because we don't want it. Leave the agricultural people alone. Let the people function. There's water issues. There's land issues. There's primarily the habitat. Read the Legacy Act. Read the Blue Ribbon Panel report. Those are good documents. Mm-hmm. That's all I can say, and I appreciate your time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I appreciate, I apologize to keep you here so long, but I think this is the kind of input that we need. And obviously, regardless of what happens on the comprehensive plan, these are issues that are not going to go away, right? These questions of ring roads and interchanges and what kind of development's appropriate in various quadrants of the city and area, surrounding areas of the city. This is something that comes up all the time, and so the better, the more of this we can get out in the open, the better. And quite frankly, I'm in agreement with many of the things that you're saying tonight.
Well, that's why go out and drive around Olympian and 1800 East. Look at the map and compare it to Rising Road in Champaign. It's a perfect balance. That's all I have to say. And between High Cross and Route 150, there are only about 6 residences that are even near those roads. And you don't have the environmental issue around Brownfield and Trelease and the Saline Greenbelt and the rest of it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, George. Next is Katrin Klingenberg, 206.5 Brady Lane. Talking to us about an open house invitation.
Hello, good evening. My name is Katrin Klingenberg, and I'm here tonight representing the Ecological Construction Laboratory, short Ecolab, which is a new non-profit organization here in Urbana. And we are promoting, researching, and implementing highly energy-efficient homes and sustainable construction for low-income people of the community. I'm very glad to be here tonight because finally I get to report on a very nice and exciting progress that we have been making. You will remember that during last year's action plan, you assigned funding to Ecolab to build one of these highly energy efficient homes. And this planning for this home is now in progress. And we are actually actively looking for a family to qualify for this home. To do so, we decided to open up my house, which is actually a prototype for this type of construction, to the public. And I would like to invite all of you, the community, and especially low-income families who might qualify for this type of grant through the city of Urbana, to join us for the open house. The open house is going to be held on Thursday, February 10, 4 till 7, for people who can not make it on the weekend. On the weekend, we will have the open house on February 13th from 2 till 5. There will be workshops explaining what families need to qualify for and how to fill out the application. And thank you for your time, and I hope to see you out at the open house this weekend.
Okay, thank you
you.
very much. Next is Lisa Truel on the parking ordinance. Lisa's at 714 West Iowa.
Good evening. I just want to say about the Urbana Public Works Department, what a wonderful group of people they are. Not only are they heroes, but they also provide great service, and I've been, and my family, the recipient of Calvin Peacock's great services, so I thank
You weren't
him.
buried in salt, were you?
Pardon?
You weren't buried
No,
in
I
salt,
wasn't.
were you?
No. I just want to very quickly say that I do support the proposed amendment to what we call the parking ordinance that Esther Patton, city staff, and the mayor have put together. Thank you very much for hearing our pleas. I also, 6 families have sent me communication that they want me to read because they could not be here because they were putting their children to bed, and they are all in the vicinity of the 806 West Iowa parking lot. Dear members of the City Council, this is by Sonia and Phil Newmark of 706 West Iowa. We are writing to support the proposed amendment to the parking lot ordinance requiring that a special use permit be obtained before tearing down a house in order to build a parking lot. We would like the wording of the proposed amendment to be changed so that the West Urbana neighborhood that no more than 0 to 5% of the parking spaces in such parking lot can be rental spots. We live a few houses down from the house that stood at 806 West Iowa Street. The 806 West Iowa Street house was torn down to make a parking lot in which 40% of the spaces can be rental spots. The conversion of a home into a parking lot, commercial or otherwise, is terrible for our neighborhood. Had the proposed change change been in effect, perhaps we could have avoided this situation. Thank you for your consideration. This communication is from Camille Goodinson. He's at 902 South Orchard. I can't make it tonight, but here's my statement. West Urbana can be either an excellent neighborhood or a mediocre parking lot. Let's have West Urbana be what it's good at. This is a communication from Michael and Elizabeth Blewa at 708 West Iowa Street. Elizabeth and I cannot attend the council meeting. However, we certainly support the idea of severely restricting the renting of parking space in West Urbana. The GREET system students often talk about their philanthropy and their citizenship, yet we have seen their arrogance and disregard toward their neighbors to gain a small amount of convenience. If these parking lots arise from the destruction of older homes, the financial pressure will usher in the unscrupulous developers in besides the fraternities and sororities that we have witnessed to this date. Elizabeth and I strongly are against increasing these parking lot blight upon our neighborhood, and we are strongly against their use as rental spaces. And let's see. This communication is from Ron Rothschild. He's at the 1000 block, 1007, I believe, South Busey. Let's see. I cannot make tomorrow's meeting, but I would like to be represented in my views as a homeowner with children who have lived on Busey Avenue for 17 years. I have watched the neighborhood only grow more crowded with parked cars and traffic, and I believe this compromises safety for our children. Tearing down any more houses and adding more parking lots will only add the traffic and take away from this beautiful neighborhood. And then I also have a communication from Debbie Grice from 1002 South Busey. And it says, thank you again for allowing the residents to address the council via written statements. Having followed the demolition of the old house up the street at 806 West Iowa with dismay in the fall, I have followed with interest the response of the West Urbana Neighborhood Association listserv and the City Council with regard to the parking lot regulations. I am greatly encouraged by the council's recent actions to close loopholes that make property conversions of this sort more difficult to carry out. Reading the discussions preceding tonight's meeting, the idea of the tension between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law keeps coming to mind. Neighbors interested in preserving the unique, historic, and family-centered feel of the West Urbana neighborhood appeal to the city and its ordinance to maintain these valuable commodities. As a fairly recent addition to the neighborhood, I am ardent in my desire to preserve all those qualities which attracted me here in the first place. However, as we all know, laws can't be written to cover every contingency, and often zoning decisions must uphold the written law even while they inevitably break the spirit of those laws. For example, maintaining the residential integrity to everyone's dismay. And you, the council, are in the hot seat in the midst of all of this. I applaud the council's recent efforts to tighten up the language of current zoning ordinances and discourage the raising of houses, historic or not, by owners seeking to profit from the constant demand for university parking. However, I urge the council to capitalize on this proactive momentum and continue to work with our tireless WUNA coordinators and steering committee to identify other loopholes and head off further circumvention of laws intended to protect what is unique about our neighborhood. Well, how's my time? Am I over?
Yeah, well, you're right at it.
Oh, you're
Did you-
very kind. I don't want to be over. It's too late. I have them all to submit in writing, so that's
Okay.
fine. It's too late.
Yeah.
But thank you
Well, if
for
you
all
have
your
a short
time.
comment of yourself, well, we can probably indulge you for a minute or two, since you were representing so many other people. Did you have anything else you wanted to
I
say?
had one more, but that's,
Okay.
really, it's too late.
Okay.
It's going to be so late.
All right, thanks. Any questions for Lisa? Okay, Linda Lorenz, 409 West High, on the parking issue.
I too am in favor of the amendment, and as many of you have probably heard me say, I live in my neighborhood because I want to ride my bicycle to work. I didn't even own a car until just a couple of years ago, and I want ordinances and policies and enforcement that protect my neighborhood from parking lots and taking down those old houses and destroying the wonderful residential nature of that neighborhood so close to the university. So please help protect the neighborhood and no more parking lots. I've got one block this way from me and one in that, and a couple that way, and they're ugly, and it's light and noise and pollution, and it's ugly, so please protect it.
Okay, thank you. And next is Charlie Smythe on the 805 South Kohler on the parking lots.
I'm Charlie Smythe, and I've spoken on this issue before. I think when it went to the Plan Commission, as you know, many of us were very disappointed that the city could do nothing to stop the tearing down of what was essentially an R2 house in an R7 zoning for putting a parking lot. So stopping this is better late than never if it stops it from happening again. Many eloquent comments from my neighbors to the issue, and I think an important one that was made was that the city needs to be proactive in protecting this neighborhood. I think that's the big message here. There are a couple of problems still with this. As good as it is, it still allows for commercial use, so you probably need to eliminate the 40%, drop it, maybe to 90% or even less. I can see letting, immediately adjacent residences and apartment buildings using this lot, but it shouldn't be a commercial venture. The other thing, of course, is that parking lots adjacent to R4 and whatnot are fine, but you're still within a stone's throw of a lot of R2 and R3 or R2 and R1 properties, and so I would suggest that the language be extended, change the word adjacent to make it a little broader. Something, since you allow parking lots within 600 feet as an adjacent use to an R4 property, maybe you need to use the same language and prohibit parking lots, or at least make them special use within 600 feet of R1 and R2. I'm glad that the comprehensive plan has come up, because this same neighborhood is affected by the comprehensive plan in a significant way. As you know, 15 years ago, this council made some significant changes to what's known as the Busey Finger, the Lincoln-Busey corridor, and in the comprehensive plan, there's a little gray area there that just doesn't belong. It's already been decided. It was decided 15 years ago to downzone and protect that neighborhood. And clearly not enough was done, because those R7 properties are coming back to haunt us. So, in the comprehensive plan, I hope you remove that gray area and just leave it alone. If anything, look at further downzonings for that area. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Okay, thank you. Anybody else for public participation? Council members? Yes, Mr. Whalen?
A couple of weeks ago, I had something very bad happen to me. I had a hemorrhage coming from my head, which was rather serious. I was losing a lot of blood. At about 3 o'clock in the morning, I woke up, and blood was pouring out of my head, and I didn't know what to do. I tried to stop it, and every time I tried to stop it, I'd plug up my nose, and then I'd take the plug out because it would fill up, and then more blood would pour out, just pouring. It was all over me, all over my bed, all over my room. And so finally my wife said to me, well, shall I call 911? I said, you better do that. So she did. She called 911, and Cheryl Horvath and Phil Edwards and Greg Kingston from the fire rescue came out to my house and showed me what I was doing. I mean, they pressed up against my nose to stop the bleeding temporarily, and assuming that was the origin of it. And and then they called for an ambulance, and they came and took me to Carl on a stretcher. And I was getting weak and thin, my head was getting fuzzy. But I wanted to say, these people, in my opinion, saved my life. These heroic fire people, firefighters, you don't know what dangers they're going to face. They don't know when that can happen, but they respond with professionalism. The three of these people just came and took charge, and thank God got me to the hospital where I stayed for a while until they had cauterized my nose where the source of the blood was. But it was very serious, and I want to thank the fire department, the fire rescue, for that great deed, in my opinion, that saved my life. And, Your Honor, I have another thing I'd like to say, too. Now, this is not quite as complimentary. I noticed I couldn't sleep the other night. Another night I couldn't sleep. And I turned on the TV and I watched Democracy Now! And when Democracy Now! Was instituted here on the council floor, something we funded and agreed to, the thought came to me, why Democracy Now? Don't we have democracy? Yes, we do. But it's a cry. It's a cry for action that is somewhat nebulous, although seen as necessary by some. But even more alarming than that, Democracy Now! If you want to watch it, you'll be surprised. There is something called Guerrilla News Network, which condemns much of our corporate structure, institutional makeup, and suggests that the people are being duped and brainwashed, and they are being dazzled by football games and TV and things by this same corporate evil structure. It's sort of like that, what is that group they call the Triangle, or there's a powerful group somewhere that controls our thoughts, controls what's happening in our country. And that's a perception and a suspicion whether or not that's true. In this particular case, this is explicitly insurgent. It lays the seeds for something that could lead to revolution or terrorism, in my opinion. If you recognize how ideas begin, and I'm sure that many people at the university do recognize this, particularly people who invent things like the LED and that kind of thing. It starts with one happening, one little event, and it happens biologically or it happens in other ways, and it grows and it grows and it grows. And this, I think, could lead to some kind of insurgency, revolution, or terrorism if taken seriously enough. And I would hope that the intellectuals in our community, I used to be proud to consider myself an intellectual, and if they could just recognize this, they might not follow the path that's being laid out for them by these people who do not trust our society. Thank you.
Any other petitions and communications from council members? Okay, we'll move on. We have no old business this evening, so we'll go to the reports of standing committees. We have a report from the Committee of the Whole. Mr. Roberts, are you the chair this week?
Yes, I am. First item, an ordinance number 2005-01-012, an ordinance amending Article 5 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code, establishing speed regulations on certain streets. Goodwin Avenue.
I move.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Shenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes? Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes?
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
Motion carries with 7 ayes. Mr. Roberts?
Okay, the second motion. An ordinance number 2005-01-013, An ordinance amending Schedule J of Section 23-172 of the Urbana Local Traffic Code, establishing curb load zoning on certain streets, Oregon Street. Does anybody so move?
I so move.
Second.
A motion and a second. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alec?
Yes.
Mrs. Blair?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Pat? Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
That motion carries with 7 ayes. Mr. Roberts?
Item number C, a resolution number 2005-01-002R, a resolution approving and authorizing the execution of an agreement with the State of Illinois for the modernization of the traffic signals at the intersection of I-74 and Cunningham Avenue, Section 25X-N, and a traffic signal interconnects from Perkins Road to O'Brien Drive, Cunningham Avenue between Perkins Road and O'Brien Drive. Does anybody so move?
I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? There's no discussion. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries. Mr. Roberts?
Okay, item number D. A resolution number 2005-01-003R, a resolution appropriating funds for the modernization of signals at the intersection of US 45 and I-74, and signal interconnects from Perkins Road to O'Brien Drive, Cunningham Avenue between Perkins Road and O'Brien Drive. Does anybody make a motion?
I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on this resolution? There's no discussion. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alec?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Pat? Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
Motion carries with 7 ayes. Mr. Roberts?
Item number E, an ordinance number 2005-01-014, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute a redevelopment agreement with Black Rock Properties Incorporated, I believe it's renamed 5 Points Northwest.
Well, this is the northwest corner of 5 Points.
Northwest, okay, 5 Points Northwest,
Yeah, that's the Cunningham.
the designation.
Cunningham and University Avenue.
Okay.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there anything, any discussion, Mr. Alex?
I would note that we received a new copy of the agreement and would ask that staff summarize the changes from what we saw at committee.
Ms. Tyler?
You have a new agreement as well as a markup copy, and the changes are minor. Basically, there is a new name of the development, and that will change the ordinance title as well. So what was previously Black Rock Properties is 5 Points Realty LLC. Second change in the agreement is a small modification so that hotel restaurant is not a necessary component of the project description, just in case that does not come to pass. Also a change that should there be a hotel restaurant on the site, that be eligible for the 80% tax increment rather than the 50%. Modification to the provision for $150,000 of site improvement costs, that these would be at the discretion of the developer, and the description is expanded to include on-site costs, including environmental costs that are being looked at currently. The provisions that were discussed last time, and we've included a map, colored map of the potential land swap with the Urbana Park District, have been clarified so that should that land swap not be executed, the agreement would still be in force. And those are indicated with a Tract A and a Tract B designation in the agreement. And we've also added at the end of the agreement this graphic as well as a legal description for the property. So that summarizes the changes since this came to you last.
And it's my understanding that the mover and seconder were moving this latest version?
Yes. Maybe.
Maybe?
It's difficult to know when we don't have anything in writing in front of us, and I'm hearing numbers and dollar amounts, and we're asking to finally approve something. Would Ms. Tyler mind just going through, going through that again, what the changes are?
If it would help,
With regard to
we
the
can,
money.
the $150,000,
Is it, there was, the 80%, well, the hotel, the 80%,
right?
you're saying hotel is not, what was it you were saying about what the change having to do with hotel?
Let's look at the markup version.
Thank you, that would help.
And, you know, these were fairly minor, so we didn't want to include it in the packet and then have additional changes. So the first page is the title change. This is a markup copy that has the lines on the side. On the second page, underlined is that Tract A, Tract B, and that breaks out the Park District land swap, which is optional, although it's certainly the intent. Page 5, we're describing this as a limited liability corporation. Page 7 is where the 80% comes into play, where we talked about retail components being subject to an 80% increment. And just for clarification, the developer did request that we include the hotel motel use as part of that, as opposed to an office use, which would be more within the 50% office or service use. So that's on page 7. On page 8 is maybe the more significant change. What we've done is relocated the text that was on page 9 to page 8, so it's part of the city's financial obligations rather than redevelopment obligations. The amount is still $150,000, but we're looking at a broader range of activities that would be covered by that, including environmental remediation, and that these could be anywhere on the site, not just within the right-of-way. And this was a request of the developer. There will be some extraordinary utility relocation and environmental remediation costs that have come up just recently. So this was his request, that there be additional consideration of that. And there's just relettering on page 10. On page 12, again, we have the activities broken up to the simple title. Acquiring fee simple title for that Tract B is optional in case that that agreement with the Park District doesn't come to pass. He would still be able to proceed with the site as it is. On page 20, we're just changing the name of the contact there to 5 Points Realty. It's still Mr. Petrie. And the signatures on page 23 are changed as well to reflect the two partners of 5 Points Realty. And Exhibit A is now completed with the legal description and the map showing Tract A and Tract B.
Any questions about the changes? Yes, Ms. Pat?
Just follow up to make sure I'm clear. So with regard to the dollar amount, the $150,000 is the same. There's not an increase. This is the same $150,000. And actually, the only change is that the improvements would be on the project development site and not specifically limited to public right-of-way.
Right.
Thank you. Could be, right. And the change on hotel motel was originally in the project description. The project description, it said it'll be 50,000 square feet, including a hotel, motel facility, a restaurant facility, an urban shopping center, and now that's being taken out, so that's not, hotel, motel, restaurant is not necessarily promised, but it's still something that can happen.
Could happen, yeah.
Okay, then, yeah, that was what I was moving when I made the motion.
That's, right, okay, so that's the understanding. Is that okay with the seconder? Who was the seconder?
I think Ms. Pat and I,
Second, whatever, yeah.
both of us, and I think it's fine.
Okay, so we're considering the newest agreement. Is there
Could I have a question?
any discussion? Yes, or questions, Mr. Roberts?
And I know that we haven't seen the, any kind of a substantial package for the actual outcome of this development, but we have certain items that are being suggested as use within the development area. And I did hear from Mr. Petrie the idea of a hotel segment, which I thought was very positive, and I'm picturing a multi-story, perhaps three-story building. Well, when I read motel, I don't get the same kind of impression. It seems like a very different kind of use. And I'm just kind of wondering, I don't remember hearing anything about a motel. I do remember hearing something about a hotel, and I just was surprised to find that wording in the document. And I'm not aware that it was before, but have I just missed that?
I don't think we specified the model. A motel is really just has more parking than a hotel. It could look very much the same.
It could, but I have a feeling that they actually serve very different purposes, but okay.
So the difference between a hotel and a motel in our ordinances is just the parking? There's a different parking requirement for a hotel and a motel?
It's just the industry, that's how it's defined. We call it hotel/motel.
Okay, so there's no difference in our...
Not that I'm aware of that we would control. I think it just leaves it open. It's very possible to be a hotel and look very much like a motel. It just depends on whether
It can look very different.
Right.
Okay. Wondering.
Any other questions? Okay, we have the motion and a second. Any discussion? If there's no further discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
Motion carries with 7 ayes. Mr. Roberts?
Oh, thank you. Item F, an ordinance number 2005, it should read, I believe, -01-015, an ordinance approving the Fowler Road Business District Revitalization Action Plan. Does anybody have a motion?
I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Ms. Chenoweth?
Perhaps we get your staff from staff.
Did you have any additional presentation?
Yep. The Committee of the Whole forwarded this ordinance with a recommendation for approval. Since then, we've had some very good input from the community, and some of our research has borne some fruit. And so we have a couple minor changes or edits to make to the plan. The first one is a request on behalf of one of our developers in the area who has some property adjacent to the business district. And while he doesn't have facades or buildings that could be improved, including his property in the district makes good sense, because if there are some projects that are occurring, we can work with those within the confines or in the premise of the action plan. So it's the request is a email that you have in your packet of materials that's been handed out prior to the meeting, and attached to that is a map with the outline of the Philo Business District in red, and in green is generally the proposed area to be added. The inclusion in the outlot plan is essentially in the very southeast corner of the current business district, which is outlined in red as well. And so that's one of the changes we thought we'd like to run before you before making any changes in the map. Also, the other item is in the action plan itself. Under item 3, in enhancing incentives, we'd like to investigate the expansion of the enterprise zone into the district as well. We have learned of some new options that we may have to increase the viability of this area for its revitalization. And that would be our only changes.
Any questions about that?
No questions.
Okay, I guess a motion would be in order to incorporate the changes.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on those, Ms. Chenoweth?
Actually, I don't have discussion on what we just moved. Excuse me.
Okay. Any discussion on that motion? Yes, Ms. Wyman?
I just have a question with regard to the map that was handed out today. There's a, down at Philo Road, where the area narrows, what's to the east or the right side? You can see a couple parking lots and then several lots of...
I believe that's church and funeral home.
Oh, okay. Thank you. That's all.
If there's any other discussion? If there's no discussion on, this is just to add the changes. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now we're on the main motion to approve the Philo Road Business District Revitalization Action Plan. Any discussion, Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes, thank you. Our last meeting was extremely long, so I actually held off my comments because I think, I'm not sure if they would have gotten in my own brain, much less anyone else's at that point in the meeting. I do appreciate Mr. Aleck's comments, and I think that they're right on, and I think it says something about this document, well, a couple of things about this document. One is that it's a long time in the coming, and I really wish that we had seen something like this a lot earlier, but given that we didn't, I'm glad. I mean, our staff has done a huge amount of work just in 6 months to get this off the ground. I'm hoping that we consider this document a living document, and that we see it. I'd like to see it every 3 months, but we could see it every 6 months. I think that we need to continue to come back to the action plan and to evaluate how we're doing on each action item. And I'd like to see a report to council on a regular basis with specific kind of, looking at the plan and being able to show what kinds of targets we've hit within different action items. A couple of things I think that I'd like to see in the next iteration of the plan, and I don't think that I want to burden this plan with a bunch of amendments because I think it's very timely and it's very important that we move forward. But in the next iteration of the plan, I'd like us to reach out to the Economic Development Corporation. I'd like to see them play a role in this plan. They're not mentioned in this plan at all. And I do understand that in part that's because the Economic Development Corporation really plays more of a manufacturing role and a technology role, but I don't see why they have to play that role. I think that it's not like that's a God-given thing that the EDC doesn't participate in large retail development. And I really think that as a person who serves on the board of the EDC, I think it's really important that we act as delegation to the EDC and say, hey, we need you, we need your expertise, and I would like to for the city of Urbana to actually increase the allocation that we give to the EDC in the future, with an understanding that they'll play a greater role in off-site business headhunting, so to speak. We need a business headhunter. And one of the things, in addition to the EDC missing in this action plan, is us going to other communities, and whether that's with the EDC or our staff, and actually securing the kinds of businesses we want to see in this area. And I feel like instead the focus right now, which is kind of a stopgap measure, is beautification. And I really think the beautification could pay for itself if we had businesses coming into the space. I am concerned. I certainly support beautification. I don't think it's enough. I'm concerned about the cost of beautification. And I think that we really need to be looking at how to go outside of our community. I was not around at this time, but I do believe that there was a time when Mayor Satterthwaite went out of the community and secured burglars for our mall. Her burgers. Oh, it was her burgers for the mall. And I think that that's exactly the kind of activity that we need for Philo Road. We need to be able to go elsewhere and go to the conferences, go to the individual commercial entities that might really fit the demographic of what we have to offer, and to try to make these connections. And I'm certain that we've done some of that, but I feel like if we have done some of that, it's not reflected yet in this plan. So I think that everything in the plan is great. I think that it's a beginning. It's not an end. And I would be very, very sad if this plan, if what happened to this plan is what happened to the downtown plan for a couple of years, which is we passed it and then it got put on a shelf. So I want to make sure that we see activity with this plan. And I certainly think it's the right direction. And I thank our staff and John in particular for doing all the work to put this plan together. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Yes, Mr. Whalen?
Just to say, the beautification is necessary, and it does help, and it's an indication of the effort and the interest being paid to this area, and that's good. But I think Ms. Chenoweth is right. The EDC has been, ignoring. I don't like to say ignoring, but they have not been really pushing Urbana for 20 years. And I think at the board meeting, it's a place to say, this is what we need and this is what we expect from you. And if you want our contribution, this is what we expect and we will get. If not, see, that happened with the Chambers of Commerce. They split up and Urbana lost out. I would say the mayor's effort to bring business in by going to Herberger's was a great effort, and it was the kind of thing that reflects on what happened in the 60s, the early 60s. And Charlie Weber, Judge Charles Weber, Democrat, went to Chicago with some of his business associates in the town, and they talked to the president of Carson's, Perry Scott. And the president of Carson's said, by golly, what you're planning sounds good to us as long as it's an extension of the downtown, and we will come in on it. But it was only by going out and reaching out and bringing that in that happened. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. We need an aggressive outreach to make this happen.
Any further discussion? Yes, Mr. Reagan.
Just to be a good partner, we are engaging the EDC, so hopefully just to recognize them, and they helped us with the enterprise zone information and background, and as well as locating the current call center, and so we are trying to engage them more, and we are trying to engage the EDC more and involve them in this process and use their expertise.
Good.
Yes, Mr. Alex.
Just wanted to follow up on a couple issues that I raised at the last meeting. First of all, let me say that I'm extremely pleased in general with this action plan, and it will be my pleasure to support it. That being said, I agree with Ms. Chenoweth's comments to the effect that I hope that we can continue to make changes and refine this document. One area which I brought up last time was the lack of any public safety component in this action plan, and I was disappointed to see that recognition of the hazards and negative effects that are posed by vacant property and a commitment on the part of the city to aggressively enforce our ordinances to ensure that vacant property in this area is kept up and kept from becoming a focus for crime or vandalism or nuisance did not make it into this report. And I hope that is something that as we look at this report in the future, if it appears that the city is not adequately enforcing our ordinances in that area, or these properties are allowed to deteriorate, I hope that it is something that the council would entertain codifying in this action plan, given that we've not done it yet. My other comment related to increased police presence in this area because of a public perception of some increased criminal activity, and I wanted to express my appreciation for Chief Adair and the Urbana Police Department. My understanding is there has been some action on this. There have been some extra patrols in this area and some extra details there with an eye toward just staying on top of the situation and making sure that citizens see a police presence there and feel safe and are safe as they patronize the businesses in this area. So I have the utmost confidence that increase in enforcement will pay dividends. I think the Urbana Police Department does a commendable job given the limited resources that they have in trying to cover the entire city, and Ward 7 certainly appreciates the efforts of the Urbana Police Department in this regard.
Yes, Mr. Walden.
We were going to do this under reports, but would it make sense for Eddie to give a report now on the activities of Philo Road?
Sure. If anybody mind, Chief?
Good evening. As a result of a fairly highly publicized incident that did occur in the Philo, Colorado area on the 25th, the police department initiated a very visible police presence increase at flexing times in that area. And as a result, we've continued that high visibility presence in that area, and it's the intent of the police department to continue it until at least the 15th of this month. And of course, we re-evaluate the effectiveness of this on a almost daily basis as we debrief the officers that are actually being assigned to that area. And we're doing a minimum of 2 separate time details on a daily basis in that area.
Any questions for the chief? Yes.
Yes, my understanding they got new management and some of the partners down there that's working closer with the police department to help.
That is correct. In fact, it's new management at 3 of the apartments in that area, and we work closely with them as they renovate and began to re-rent those properties.
Yes, Mr. Alex?
Just wanted to reiterate my appreciation for your efforts in this area. I've gotten, a number of citizen comments expressing concern about the area. I live, pretty close to there, and I think, I certainly feel safe in the neighborhood, and don't want to be seen as, diverting police resources from other areas of the community. But certainly appreciate your efforts, and I think, a continued presence there and staying on top of this area, whether it's more of a real threat or a perceived threat, staying on top of this will definitely help as we look to revitalize that neighborhood.
Yes.
And I appreciate your efforts, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Chief Adair? Okay, thanks, Chief. Back on discussion for the Philo Road Action Plan. Any other comments? Discussion? If not, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Shanawith?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes? Mr. Hayes? Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
That motion carries with 7 ayes. Mr. Roberts?
Item G.
This is a presentation that I'm doing just to inform the council members and the general public about this TIF number 2 plan amendment. I know you already have some idea about it, as you received copies a while back, and I also presented some of the background and purpose of this plan back in December when we approved the time and date for the public hearing for this. And the purpose of this amendment is to supplement and update the existing TIF 2 plan created in 1986. And that plan established the TIF district, and basically that district surrounds the TIF district number 1, which is the core of the downtown area, which is Main Street, Race Street, Broadway, and it extends all the way from Urbana Avenue on the east up to Crystal Lake Drive on the north, as far as Phillips Rec Center on the west. And it's a regular boundary, but and on the south, California Avenue is the southern extent of that. And it's established that TIF for a 23 years term, and that is the standard for term for TIF districts. And now that TIF district, 23 years, is coming towards the end of its life, 2009, TIF number 2 is set to expire, and that doesn't leave much leeway for us to be able to provide TIF benefits to new projects that would be occurring at this time or in the next couple of years. And for that reason, we're looking to extend the TIF term for an additional 12 years, which we are allowed to do as long as we get approval from the state legislature, which we did. Governor Blagojevich signed a bill back in August of last year, allowing us to be able to extend the TIF and go through the formal adoption process. And of course, it still has to be approved by council. This would extend the term to 2022 and would allow for completion of more projects, and many of those projects were ones that were identified in the Downtown Strategic Plan. And along with the extension of TIF 1, which took place last year, this is a logical extension of that plan, and is important for completing a lot of important projects such as the Lincoln Square, 5 Points East, North Broadway, and other areas including Leal Park, Boneyard Pathway, Boneyard area development, and Carl the Downtown Pathways. And the other purpose of the amendment is to add in budget for these new projects, and this shows the boundary of the TIF. It's the one in red, the larger one. The blue line there is TIF number 1, and again, that's the core area, and TIF number 2 encompasses a pretty wide area. This shows the existing land uses as shown in the map in the Downtown Strategic Plan. And this is the framework plan that was done for the Downtown Strategic Plan, which separates the downtown area into different districts, including separating by government uses, the Main Street area, the Near North District, which is north of Water Street, up to roughly about to a little bit north of the tracks there, Leal Park area, and then all the auto-oriented uses on Cunningham and University. And then there's the residential transition area on the west side of the district and a little bit along the south. Some of the projects, capital improvement projects identified and budgeted for in the plan would be for a Main and Springfield Plaza. That's at the triangle where they split off on the 200 block of Main. Broadway Avenue streetscape, which is something that was also identified in the strategic plan. Water Walnut Street improvements, North Race Street improvements, parking expansion, Carl the Downtown bike path, Boneyard corridor, and lot acquisition consolidation. And then some of the redevelopment projects, these would be private projects which would be able to be funded by TIF. We would be able to provide a benefit based on the increase in the tax revenue generated by these projects. And those include the Lincoln Square Village, as I mentioned before, with 5 Points, Race and University Corner, and Leal Park, Springfield and Main Triangle, Gill Athletics, Green and Race Corner, Green and Cedar vacant lot, Main and Vine corners. That's the east side corners there. Strawberry Fields, if they ever want to go through an expansion, and then Strong Banquet Center on North Race Street, and historic building rehabs. We'd be able to continue the current redevelopment incentive program. That's the facade loan program that has helped a lot with properties along Main Street, Race Street, and elsewhere in downtown, and improving and making more attractive a lot of the older buildings. And this map shows where some of those projects would be located. And this budget, this was a preliminary budget. We had the Joint Review Board meeting today, and they suggested a few changes to it. So there are going to be some changes made before it goes to you again. I'll be able to send you a copy as soon as we make those changes. I didn't have time today since we met this afternoon. But it shows some estimates of what the budget could be. The base equalized assessed value for the TIF is about $9.5 million. The current equalized assessed value is a little over $14 million, which is about a 2.7% annual increase, including inflation. Now, with the projects, redevelopment projects that we have outlined, we would expect the EAV to go up dramatically, up to approximately $60 million if we continue to build upon the momentum that we've got now with a lot of these projects and what we currently have in the works. and that's about a 13% average annual increase, discounting inflation, and the increment to the TIF would be approximately $21 million just from those new projects alone, not including the increase due to inflation, which we estimate to be approximately a little over $35 million at about a 3.25% inflationary increase. And this shows the assessed value projection, and this is, again, using the an old figure. We're using a more optimistic figure of a 5%, but then Joanne Chester informed us that was probably a bit too high. But even so, this would be approximately $35 million, so a little less than what's there. But this would be the same, the new project increment. And why are we amending the plan? Well, for the reasons that I stated before, it allows for private investment that otherwise might not occur. And that's actually one of the prerequisites for even establishing a TIF district. This will help achieve the goals of the downtown plan. There will be minimal impact to taxing districts since the plan does not call for more service-demanding uses. And actually, there will be some fairly immediate benefit to them, as the fact that Lincoln Square is currently below its base equalized assessed value back in 1986 by approximately $1.3 million. As they do their project there, that difference in the increment there will go straight back to the taxing districts up to that point, and then everything thereafter would go to the TIF fund. And that means about $64,000 a year for the life of the TIF to the school district, and in proportion with the other taxing districts. It would increase in revenues to taxing districts upon expiration of the TIF due to the higher EAV growth. So assuming that $35 million figure, that's going to be a significant increase in about 17 years that they otherwise would not have seen, thanks to a lot of the projects that were accomplished from having TIF incentives available. The amendment process, we've worked on the plan draft. There's going to be a few more changes to that. We've sent out the notices to taxpayers and taxing districts, state and nearby residents. We have the public notice. We sent that to the News Gazette. We held the TIF Joint Review Board meeting today, and they're going to have 30 days to submit a report of any more comments and public input from them as to the plan, and also to state why or why not the plan continues to qualify as in any of the eligible criteria as a redevelopment area. And then the public hearing is scheduled for March 7th, and council discussion and adoption we're expecting for mid-March, so it'll be shortly after that. And so I should definitely have the new copy of the plan draft. We can get that up on the website. Currently, it's already on the website. We're going to make a change to that and get that on there. You can go to the city webpage and click on the left side in the left column there, and it'll say TIF 2 Plan Amendment Draft. And also, if you go on the Economic Development webpage, which is www.city.urbana.il.us/ED, there's a link to it on there as well. And are there any questions about it?
Yes, Ms. Lyman?
Just have one question. Who are the members of the Joint Review Board for the TIF 2, and are those different for each of the TIFs that we have?
No, the TIF Joint Review Board is the same members for all the TIFs.
And who are they, or what groups, entities are represented?
The school district, the park district, the county, the township, community college district, and MTD.
Isn't there?
And then there's a public member also.
Okay, and who's the public member on the TIF?
Tom Costello.
From the MTD?
Yes, but he's the public. He's not there representing the MTD. He's representing as a member of the public.
And how long are the terms?
The terms?
Like, I'm just thinking if someone else, I don't know if the term is 10 years or 5 years, and how long, I'm just thinking other people, I know people have expressed interest in the TIFs and what they do, and if someone were interested in becoming a member of the Joint Review Board as a public member, when would the next opportunity for them to apply, and to whom would they apply to be a member of that committee?
I believe
That's the only, there's only one at-large member, and I can't remember when Mr. Costello was appointed. I'd have to look back and find out
I
what
think
the
it's 5
term
years,
is.
but I could
If you could
check
let
for
me
sure.
know, that'd be great. Thank you.
The rest of them are, Ed, the taxing districts appoint their own members, so the school board gets to appoint their member, and Parkland and so forth. Any other questions? Okay, well, there's no action on this item. So, but as Ryan was saying, there's a timeline there, so just pay attention to the timeline, and we'll see this, a few weeks.
Well, the public hearing will be March 7th, and then it'll be presented again for adoption and consideration at the committee and then council meeting after that.
So this will be coming back to us. Okay.
And here's the web address in case anyone wants to write it down. And also, we can have hard copies available of the draft at the city clerk's office or in the community development lobby if anyone wants to look at it.
Okay, Mr. Roberts, you want to just let us
Yes.
know when the next meeting is?
The next meeting of the Committee of the Whole will be next Monday night, February 14th at 7:30 p.m. here in the council chambers.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have reports of special committees. Any special committee reports this evening? Okay, reports of officers.
Just a reminder, our final public open house for the comp plans tomorrow night at the Civic Center at 7 o'clock. We wanted to touch base on some of the economic development projects. John's going to do that. Just one other comment on the TIF. I would just remind the council that our goal is to have, since this council has been intimately involved with TIF projects and doing 5 TIF agreements in TIF 2, we're actually trying to get this scheduled and done as soon as possible with this council, so we don't have to go through the educational curve again. So that's the plan. So, thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly, January has been another busy month for all of us. Retention visits have all been in the Philo Road Business District, and council has approved several development projects, and some other ones are being worked on now. He approved County Plaza redevelopment agreement, as well as agreement for the Gill site, and finally approved the Philo Road Business District action plan. And you've also approved the 5 Points Northwest agreement this evening, and the Committee of the Whole forwarded that, and we continue our work on the Enterprise Zone extension, which we mentioned this evening, another aspect of it. As far as building permits, started off the year with 4 permits under Build Urbana, which takes us to a total of 604 permits under that program. And we continue meeting with developers, and we are working on a couple of development agreements with them, as well as working with some business owners on new sites that they'd like to pursue, as well as working with our partners in the Alliance, as well as the UBA, and working with some TIF applications for the downtown program.
Any questions about economic development activities? Yes, Mr. Allen?
I'd just like to make a comment. I think that 604 permits for homes have been issued under Build Urbana is something that we as a city should be very proud of. I think it's been a very successful program, and I think, if you look at all the new construction that's happened in the last several years, after a long period of essentially nothing being built in terms of residential properties in Urbana, I think it's impossible to look at that program as anything other than a success, and I just want to say I appreciate the efforts of the city and the council and the mayor in making that happen.
Okay, thanks. I think, with those homes being built out there, that makes that area more attractive for retail development there, too. So we're hoping that retailers notice that there are more houses and more people in the area to spend money and look at the Philo Road area as an attractive area to place their business. Okay, well, we'll move on to new business then. We have a few items. First is an ordinance authorizing the extension of a performance bond for Weller's Lincolnwood 4 subdivision. This is for sidewalks.
Very briefly, at Weller's Lincolnwood 4 subdivision, the sidewalks have not been completed at all the sites yet, and that's because the developer has been putting the sidewalks up after the construction of the property so he doesn't damage the sidewalks as he goes through the construction process. The performance bond on that for getting the sidewalks done expired at the end of last year. In order to make sure that we were protected, we collected on the performance security in the amount necessary for us to get the sidewalks completed should we need to complete them ourselves. And we can do that if we choose, but the developer has sold the remaining undeveloped lots to another developer, Flatland Development Incorporated, and that developer seeks to simply extend the performance bond for 1 year to get the rest of the lots built out and then get the sidewalks done. That would be fine under our ordinances. It's just that our ordinances require City Council approval to get that extension to happen. If the council approves this extension, then what we'll do with the performance security is simply remit that back to the prior developer, and because we've got a replacement performance security from the new developer. And on the other hand, if the council chooses not to extend the bond, then we'll simply take the performance security that we've collected and get the sidewalks finished ourselves. We'll take any questions.
Questions, Mr. Holt?
Yeah. Is this extension for a year, did you say, or longer?
I believe that's what we put in there.
Do you think that
1 year?
The purpose for the delay in having all the sidewalks installed was that there was still construction out there? But my assumption is there's still some vacant lots where no construction has even started?
Yes, I believe that's correct. If you have specific questions about exactly what's happening over there, maybe Mr. Gray could answer better than I could. I'm not sure about that. Do you have specific questions?
Well, I'm just thinking that this is in 1 year. I have no idea how many more of the lots will be completed. It doesn't sound like that many more will be, and we might be in the same position in a year from now concerning unfinished lots and unfinished sidewalks where in the future heavy trucks will be coming in and out. I don't have any real objection to allowing the new owner of the property to have an extension, but I'm just sort of wondering, a year is a short time to expect a subdivision to be completed.
Mr. Gray, do you know how many off the top of your head are unfinished yet?
No, maybe around 10 or so homes, and it's possible they may not be all built out, but I think 1 year is a reasonable time to finish the sidewalk work this year. So
part of the concern there is that we not extend too much because we want the people who have already bought houses there to have complete sidewalks going through the neighborhood that aren't sidewalks that aren't interrupted by wherever there's an unbuilt home, so it just seems that a year is a reasonable time, and seems that if there are some where the homes don't get built, well, then they can just put in the sidewalks there anyways, like many other developers actually do, and just be a little bit more careful about the sidewalks and the construction process.
Thanks.
Any other questions? If no other questions, motion would be in order.
I move ordinance number 2005-02-016, an ordinance authorizing the extension of a performance bond for Weller's Lincolnwood 4 subdivision sidewalks.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? If there's no discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
Okay, that motion carries with 7 ayes. Next, we have an ordinance amending the zoning ordinance of the City of Urbana, Illinois with respect to regulation of accessory parking lots located in close proximity to single-family neighborhoods This was plan case number 1915-T-04. Ms. Tyler?
This amendment would allow accessory use parking lots which are proposed to be located on a parcel separate from the principal use, whether off-site or on an adjacent parcel as part of a subsequent expansion, and in close proximity to single-family residential neighborhoods by special use only. The benefits of the special use would involve public notice and city review of related special use permit criteria such as lighting, landscaping, traffic safety, buffers, etc. Under our current rules for accessory uses, including accessory parking lots, are allowed in any zone where the principal use to which the accessory use is accessory is allowed. And in addition, for accessory use parking lots, these may be located on off-site lots within 600 feet of the principal use. Result can be of this application of accessory versus principal zoning is a creation of accessory parking lots in areas which are otherwise predominantly single-family. Also, under our current rules in the definitions section, there is a limitation for accessory use parking lots that at least 60% of those parking spaces must be dedicated to the principal use. Also, an important rule is that in residential zones, that use must be reserved for occupants of residential uses. However, as we state in this amendment, those provisions really need to be in the regulatory portions of the zoning ordinance, not just in the definitions. This amendment was really brought to light by the situation that was brought up during public comments of the accessory parking lot proposed on a residential parcel at 806 West Iowa Street. And this is to serve the Alpha Chi Omega sorority on Lincoln Avenue. So it's really around the corner. It's in an area that was really all residential. The lot just happened to be zoned R7, which allowed for the accessory parking to be located, but was an eye-opener in that really is a residential block, and there was not anticipation that this particular parcel could be redeveloped as a parking lot. So consequently, in October, City Council directed staff with a motion to initiate a plan case for zoning ordinance amendments necessary to address these issues presented by placement of accessory parking lots in close proximity to single-family residential neighborhoods through such means as requiring special use review on such lots, as well as establishing appropriate development regulations. Text amendment is included in the ordinance, but the changes are outlined in the staff memo, and it's broken down into 4 parts. This first part is in the definition section, and this is where we attempt to correct having regulatory language in the definition section that should be later in the ordinance. So that's really just a relocation of that text. Then part 2, we get to the portion of the ordinance that deals with use regulations in the table of permitted uses, and propose adding an item number 3 to section 5-E, 53E, number 3. If the off-site parking is located immediately adjacent to or across public right-of-way from property zoned R1, R2, or R3, it shall require a special use permit subject to the provisions of section 7-10. And this is specifically with respect to accessory off-street parking within 600 feet. So we've added that provision. If you're going to use the 600 feet for off-site accessory parking and it's adjacent to these residential zones, you need a special use permit. And we've added a new item F, that's on page 4 of the staff memo. And again, pretty much the same thing, that accessory use parking located on a parcel separate from the principal use, whether it's off-site or on an adjacent parcel as part of subsequent expansion, and which is adjacent or across public right-of-way from properties owned R1, R2, or R3, shall be permitted by special use only, subject to the provisions of this new section 7-10. Special use approval would not be necessary for on-site accessory parking, which is required for a new use or an expansion of an existing use that is otherwise allowed by right or by conditional use according to Table 5-1. Special use approval would also not be necessary for 1- and 2-family residential accessory parking expansions allowed under Section 8-3I. So we're really targeting those added parking lots, those separate parking lots, those after-the-fact situations that we feel should necessitate this special use review when it's near these residential properties. Then with the new section, Article 7, we identify some of those special use permit criteria that the city can look at, and these would include protection of adjacent residences from lighting, provision of adequate drainage facilities, required landscape buffering and/or fencing, traffic access and safety, parking lot design requirements, and other considerations that may be necessary to preserve the essential character of the district. So it's really a broad compass of issues that can be addressed in that particular case through the site plan review and the special use permit. And finally, in Section 4, Part 4 would be to relocate that text from the definition section into a regulatory section. Under that explanation, it was raised, some of the comments from this evening earlier were raised at the Plan Commission. Would it not be wise to increase that 60% limit for these off-site residential parking lots to prevent a situation where there's essentially a commercial activity being promoted, may not be visible, there may not be signs, it may not look like a principal use parking lot, but there could be an incentive, particularly close to campus, that some of these be constructed as a commercial enterprise because parking lots or parking spaces are so precious. And so there was discussion at Plan Commission. At the commission, they felt, well, this is really not what we've been asked to do. So even though it seemed that they felt there was merit, they did not include that in this version that's been forwarded to you. However, we've been working subsequently and with requests of the public and working with Councilmember Pat to review the public notice, and we do think that it's within the parameters of this public notice to change that percentage, and I think there'll be a proposal to do that this evening, and as well as a proposal, as some of the comments made by the public, that, really let's not just go adjacent. There could be situations where you need to go a few lots further, and I think Mr. Smythe mentioned 600 feet as a possibility, and that also would fit within the parameters of the public notice for this evening. So in summary, the amendment would assist in administering and enforcing the zoning ordinance. It's consistent with goals and objectives of the comprehensive plan calling for neighborhood preservation. It would address those concerns about accessory parking lots that are located in close proximity to residential areas through special use review. It's going to help to clarify some of our zoning ordinance language and identify those specific special use criteria and regulations. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Tyler at this point? Yes.
Just have a couple. A parking lot, I guess it would be an accessory use parking lot for a residential use is permitted by right on the same parcel. Is that correct?
Yes.
So if you have a residential property, be it a fraternity house or sorority house or single-family residence, and you wanted to build a parking lot next to it, the city has no recourse to prevent a landowner who owns two adjacent lots from assembling those lots into a single parcel. Is that correct?
If the zoning's different on the two lots, that may not be possible. The accessory use needs to be allowed in zones where that principal use is permitted. So in this case, because the lot was zoned R7, it was, and R7 allows sororities, therefore a parking lot accessory to a sorority was allowed on the R7 lot. A neighbor house lot was zoned R3, and fraternities are not allowed on fraternities, so therefore they were not able to build a parking lot there.
Well, let's say neighbor house had bought the adjacent, or had assembled those two lots into a single parcel. That would have been essentially a split-zoned parcel at that point?
Yes, and they did attempt to rezone, and were not able to do that.
Well, I remember that, but there's no automatic right to rezoning associated with replatting.
No, there isn't.
Okay. And the other question I had is with regard to multiple residential uses sharing a parking lot, who's the accessory to who in that case? In other words, if you had one block with, say, 3 small apartment buildings on it, or 3 duplexes, duplexes are okay in R2, so say 3 duplexes, and you had a parking lot on some other lot, all within the same zoning district, who has to have 60% of that lot? I mean, if you have 3 apartment buildings that are sharing a parking lot, they each have essentially 33%, let's say, of the lot. Is it the intent of the zoning ordinance that they all be in violation of the zoning ordinance for sharing this parking?
I don't think that's the intent. I think somebody would have initiated that accessory parking lot. And what the rule currently says is they can have up to 40% of that lot used by other residential uses. Why 40%, 60%? Because you have a break at the midway. If it's more than 50%, it's no longer accessory, it becomes more principal. So then it would tilt towards a principal use parking lot. So I think that's where we get the 60%.
I guess my question goes to the intent of the ordinance, and that's that we already have this restriction that parking lots in essentially, in effect, it says parking lots in a residential area have to be used for residential use. You can't use them for adjacent businesses or whatever else. What's the legal nexus or the public purpose that's attempting to be protected by saying we care that the people who are parking in this lot live in this apartment building on the block and not this apartment building on the block?
I think the way the zoning ordinance is currently written, it is attempting to encourage some level of shared use. But when you get over that 40%, it's becoming more like a commercial enterprise or a principal use parking lot. That's what I believe the intent currently is.
When you say commercial enterprise, I mean, this language, I guess it seems like the language for reserved for residential use and the 60-40% thing are redundant. That if it's reserved for residential use, I mean, somebody who lives in Philo renting a space in Urbana, I mean, even though they live in Philo, it doesn't count as accessory to residential use, right? I mean, it's soon to be considered to meet the standard for all parking spaces have to be reserved for residential use. That implies residential use by parcels in the 600-foot limit, right? Otherwise, it's not accessory use anymore. It is a principal use parking lot. So I guess I don't understand how it seems like you're basically saying 100% of it has to be used for residential use within 600 feet, and that's a much stronger standard than saying 60% of it has to be.
I think there are two standards in one here in the definition section, and we're trying to break those out. I think what's important about in these residential zones, the accessory use parking lot being for residents only, is that we avoid the situation of church parking lot expansion or school parking lot expansion right in the middle of a single-family residential area. So I think there's a protection there hiding in our definition section. I think the 60% rule is a recognition that some shared use is good in any zone, and that doesn't just limit it to residential, that's any parking. So we want efficient use of parking lots. In business areas, oftentimes you're right next door to each other, or you're nearby. Some of our downtown locations, there's no way to get additional parking, so that 600-foot opportunity is very important. So whoever owns that parking lot within 600 feet has an opportunity to have 40% used by another use. So I think it lends itself to efficiencies when we're in the multifamily and commercial realm. When we get to single family, I think there's opportunity for abuse, particularly near the university.
I guess I understand what you're saying. I still have a problem with this notion that a shared parking lot has to be primarily attached to one use. It seems like this is something that we'd like to encourage. We don't want to encourage people to build parking lots in West Urbana and rent them out to day users, but we do want to encourage people to be as creative as they can in providing that parking, rather than putting 6 parking spaces in the back of every every lot that's higher than R2. So I was just wanting to get at the intent behind. It seems like to me that if you already have the 60%, or if you already say this all has to be dedicated to residential use, accessory residential use, that already implies to me that it has to be within 600 feet. So to say, oh yeah, 60% of it has to be associated with one building as opposed to the other building, I don't really fully understand it. We can take that up in discussion.
I think the proposal too would break the residential percentage out from the multifamily or the commercial.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, Ms. General.
Yeah, I have a few questions. One is, will the changes that we make today, if we do make those changes, to the regulation of accessory parking lots apply to parking lots, accessory parking lots that were established before today? So particularly, the piece that I'm concerned about is the percentage piece. Will this apply to parking lots which exist now, which are accessory parking lots, which, for all I know, may or may not be rented out to people who are not residents in the area?
Special use permit requirement will apply to anything new. So the 806 West Iowa, they had already applied, and we will not be able to require a special use permit. The change, if there is a change in the percent that can be used for accessory, would apply from now on. However, any parking lot that was established in its shared use before this change would then be legally non-conforming. And if they wanted to expand or change their rental arrangement, then they would be subject to the new rules.
Okay, so, yeah, it's my understanding that this refers to special use, and so it's not actually a change in our ordinance that covers all accessory parking lots in R1 through R3. Is that correct? It just refers to our special use process.
The change that's before you in the ordinance deals only with the special use, requiring special use in these certain circumstances. And I know that there's been a suggestion that we tighten up the percent of shared use again in those situations. That's not in the ordinance you have, but I know that there will be a proposal that fits within the public notice to do that this evening.
Okay. You're saying, just to clarify, that that's something that will be coming down the line potentially in the future, not, it doesn't fit within the public notice because this refers to the special use permit process?
No, it does fit, to address that 60% concern did fit within the description of the public notice for this case.
Right. So just to, are you done?
Go ahead if you want to clarify, that'd be helpful.
Well, just to follow up, do we know of, I mean, if the change is made from 60% to 90%, do we know of any accessory use parking lots that are currently renting out, say 40% to a non-accessory, to an outside use? We don't know, I mean, do we know of any that?
I don't have any specific knowledge. We may find out about them subsequently. A lot of times these are private arrangements that we don't hear about or have a record of. They don't come in and ask for a permit to do this. So.
And then just a couple of follow-up questions, if I may. The 600 feet, I'm looking actually at the change, the proposed amendment at the very bottom. So it says that changes the percentages. If an off-site accessory use parking lot, which is accessory to a residential use, is located within 600 feet of any property zoned R1, R2, and R3, et cetera, does this cover, because I don't know what 600 feet is, does this cover the properties that exist between Lincoln and Busey, for example? I mean, it would cover other areas as well, but are there properties between, say, Lincoln and Kohler that where you could have an accessory use, it's not within 600 feet of an R1, R2, or R3, and therefore this particular language does not apply?
I think there are too many negatives in that question.
I wonder how far 600 feet is generally. It's, you know, a lot of the lots there, you know, between Busey and Kohler, for instance, would be about 60 feet. They're 58.
About 10 lots.
About 10 lots. And so you're generally talking they're over a block. 600 feet is over a block. Like that block between Busey and Kohler is probably less than 600 feet.
Okay. So it would apply to basically all properties between Kohler and Lincoln Avenue?
Yeah, and that particular one that you're mentioning would mean that those accessory parking lots would have to have at least 90% of the total number of spaces to the accessory use, and not rent it out to somebody else.
Okay. Those are all my questions for now.
And I think if you look north, though, you might see a little more of the impact of the 600 feet from our two areas to some commercial or higher density uses. So.
Yeah, there are other areas to look at as well. Any other questions?
I think Ms. Pat had an answer.
Oh, no, I was just wondering if when we're going to go back into the order of making motions and...
Well, we're just getting questions, yeah.
So the staff
So,
report.
if there are no more questions, the motion would be in order.
Oh, I'll make the motion. I move approval of the plan case.
Second.
I'd second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Ms. Pat?
I move an amendment, which has already been debated, but we'll just do it backward. And that is, you all have it in writing in front of you. It's two changes. It looks like more because I pointed out each place the language appears, but the first part is wherever the language immediately adjacent to or across public right-of-way from appears in this ordinance, it would be replaced with within 600 feet of. And the second part is to add in the two sections dealing with the percent of the space that can be used, and they're pointed out here, they're in Section 1 and Section 4 of the ordinance, to add the sentence, if an off-site accessory use parking lot which is accessory to a residential use is located within 600 feet of any property zoned R1, R2, or R3, at least 90% of the total number of parking spaces in the accessory use parking lot must be dedicated to serve the principal use. So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Ms. Pat?
I can speak to that. Thank you. Briefly, I know it's late. The plan case, as was prepared and approved by the Plan Commission, did a good job of addressing the specific concern that the neighbors immediately adjacent to 806 West Iowa had about parking lots adjacent to their home. The broader question, which affects not just Lincoln to Busey, but it could affect the area around Philo Road in Colorado. It could affect the area around Vine in Maine, or just southeast of Vine in Maine. It could affect areas on North Lincoln, is where we have, for all practical intents and purposes, a principal use parking lot. And I think this goes to what Mr. Alex was asking about earlier, about what is the concern. Our zoning ordinance treats a principal use parking lot differently than an accessory use, because a principal use parking lot is a commercial parking lot. And many people expressed concern in the last couple of years when they've seen a whole house or several houses torn down and a parking lot replacing it, that this is like a commercial parking lot. Technically, under our zoning ordinance, what distinguishes whether or not it's commercial is whether the people parking in it are parking there to use a use which is accessory, like a church or an apartment building, or if it's a commercial lot. But the effect on a neighborhood of tearing down one or more lots and turning them into just one or more structures and turning into parking lots, so they have the same effect of it being like a commercial lot. So the basic idea here is to take a amount of distance that is already used in the ordinance and that is presumably considered close, which is the 600 feet, and to say that whenever a parking lot is within 600 feet of single-family uses, it would require special attention. And the part of the ordinance where the 600 feet exists now is that someone could build an apartment building and have no parking on site whatsoever and provide their tenant parking within 600 feet. Because presumably 600 feet is close enough to a building for it to be reasonable to have your accessory parking there. So therefore, the idea here simply is that if anything, any parking lot that takes up, that is not part of or adjacent to the actual structure, or on the same lot as the actual structure, that is going to exist somewhere in a residential area gets special use consideration. And the second part also has to do with the use of a parking lot. The intent here is to eliminate the incentive for what really is a commercial parking lot in a residential area. This would apply only to off-site accessory use parking lots, so it wouldn't be the parking lot for the church or for the apartment building if it's on their land, but if it's on another lot, it would be an off-site accessory use lot, and if it is within 600 feet of any single-family use, that its purpose has to be truly accessory parking. The reason for 90% rather than 100% is because it really is good to have flexibility that if a lot is not full and there's a neighboring use that needs to use a few spaces, they can do that, but the intent is to eliminate the incentive for someone to tear down a house and build a parking lot when they don't really need the parking for their actual use, but where they want to more or less operate it like a commercial lot, which is what it seems to me if 40% of the spaces in your lot are being rented out to folks from a neighboring use, it's a commercial parking lot, and that really is not, it really is not an accessory lot under our ordinance.
Any other discussion? Yes, Mr. Allen.
Well, I respect the opinions of the Plan Commission with regard to the original plan case, and I would support that. I'm a lot less comfortable with the amendment, and I'm not sure I could support it for the following reasons. First, I think the notion of the 600 feet is, in the original ordinance, is designed to be the distance that someone can be reasonably expected to walk from parking to their home, and I think represents a reasonable accommodation to give developers and their landowners in this area flexibility to not have to, pave every backyard in order to provide parking, and to that extent I support it. But I think when we get into saying that, we're going to start making zoning decisions not based on what zone the property is in, or not even what zone is across the street or immediately adjacent to the property, but what is within 600 feet of the property, we're really starting to, abrogate the intent of the zoning ordinance itself. I mean, there's a lot of parcels in that area with a lot of different zoning. A lot of thought has gone into over the years what each given parcel has been zoned, and that's been, done with the oversight of the Plan Commission and the City Council and the Zoning Board of Appeals and the zoning administrator. And I think for us to just make a blanket statement that, okay, somehow this zone, which is 600 feet away from this zone, represents a controlling influence over what can be built in this other zone, I think is moving away from certainly the intent of the zoning ordinance, and so I would oppose it on those grounds. My other concern is related to this 90%, and I think I understand the concern about not wanting to have commercial parking lots next to your home, but if you look at the situation in some of these blocks in this particular area, let alone elsewhere in the city, you have some older buildings which did not provide sufficient provision for parking. The city, would like to see adequate parking provided for those structures. One very reasonable, to my mind, way to do that is to, out of so many lots on a given block, provide a parking lot that serves multiple buildings or multiple uses on that block. And I think basically to say 90% of a parking lot has to be associated with one building is moving away from the original intent of providing shared parking, and essentially saying that in order to meet the requirements that the city imposes on you in terms of how many parking spaces you have to have, and in order to operate duplexes, multifamily buildings, or whatever, which the city has zoned some of in this area, although the neighborhood may not like it very much. The only way you can do that is by putting a parking lot in the back of every one of these structures, and we already hear complaints about people dumping gravel in backyards and building these sort of ad hoc parking lots, and I know the city has done everything it can to oppose these, but one way in which we can efficiently meet the requirements to provide parking and to get some of these cars off the street and to minimize the incentives to be paving backyards is to provide an incentive, or at least not to provide a disincentive, to provide parking that's shared by multiple uses or multiple residential uses. I feel that to say that if 6 different apartment buildings or occupancies in the area are sharing a parking lot, that's somehow a commercial parking lot, and that's somehow worse than each of these having their own parking lot, misses the point. And I understand the spirit of the ordinance or the amendment. I understand the sensitivity of those living in this neighborhood and not wanting the neighborhood to be paved in order to build parking lots. But I think, given that the city requires that parking be provided, and given that there is a need on the part of the people who are living there to park, the city should do everything that we can to encourage this parking to be created in the most efficient manner. And I think the fact that you can combine parking for multiple uses, as long as they're residential, as long as they're within 600 feet, is an asset of the original ordinance rather than a liability. And I think for those 2 reasons I would oppose the amendment.
Is there any further discussion? Mr. Roberts?
I think I understand perhaps your thought about trying to make it more available to multiple users to find parking for their tenants. And it is a problem when you have the backyards of a home which has been converted into a rooming house, or it's zoned to have multiple tenants, where the backyard becomes basically a paved parking lot due to the number of vehicles that wish to be parked there. And it's not a pretty sight, and it does cause a congested feeling into the neighborhood. But I don't think that it's going to be all that useful to try to start designating maybe what you're calling a city parking or city instituted parking into these neighborhoods either, because you're also going to be then requiring some decision where you're going to tear down some house to provide this kind of parking assistance to the neighborhood. And I think the purpose of the complaints of the citizens is that they've seen, they're not anxious to see extra houses being torn down to provide convenient parking for the residents. Now, is it important for each apartment to have a parking spot? It does seem like it is the right, I suppose, of each individual to park their car where they wish to park on their property, but I don't know if trying to establish some kind of like city parking, which I guess is what your thought might be.
No, if I can clarify, I'm speaking of the requirement that the city already has, that there have to be so many parking spaces for each bedroom, for each unit.
Yes.
And personally, if you've heard my comments before Plan Commission in the past, I think the city's requirements in that area are too aggressive. I think we require too much parking, and we overlook some opportunities for being able to construct residential uses in some of these more historically sensitive areas where we're essentially saying, if you want to reuse this structure, you have to pave the backyard. And I've had considerable disagreement with other members of the Plan Commission and the Council on this, but what it comes down to is either the city's got to require parking, or the city's got to, at some point we have to come to terms with, it's bad that we're creating requirements to create all these parking lots. At the same time, it's bad that by not having these requirements to create parking, we're pushing cars onto the street and people are always going to park there. I mean, it's a question that's never going to be answered. But specifically, my comment was not meant to say that the city should be saying you got to tear down houses and build parking lots, but to say that we're already requiring that parking lots accompany residential uses. And my comment was that I felt that this amendment would restrict the ability to share that parking among multiple uses and essentially proliferate these paved backyards.
Well, 90% does seem maybe high, but I guess I was imagining 80, but I thought 60 was too low. And maybe we're just pulling, percentages out of a hat at this point, but I think there is a problem with the 60%, and I think there is a need for adjustment.
Any other discussion? Yes, Ms. Wyman?
I'd just like to respond first, in support of the amendment, the proposed amendment that Ms. Pat spoke to, and in response also to what Mr. Alex said. The motion that actually directed staff to initiate this plan case, which is on page 2 of the packet, it doesn't say anything about 60% or any percentage. And in fact, I think when council, certainly when we made this motion, my understanding, my impression was not that it would be any sort of percentage less than 100%. And so I was surprised to see when it came through Plan Commission and then to council that it was anything less than 100%, much less that it was only 60% that would be required for parking. One issue to look at here is, as Mr. Alex says, that we should be minimizing the incentives to pave backyards. And while that's correct, I think we should also be minimizing especially the incentives to rent out spaces to commuters. We shouldn't be turning the neighborhoods, whether it's West Urbana or north of Green Street, where I represent, or the Philo Road area, to turn residential areas, places where houses, especially historic homes, are located, to turn those into, or create this extra incentive to turn those into spaces that could be rented out to people who are commuting from other parts of Champaign County to their places of work. And I think that this proposed amendment, as Ms. Pat has laid it out, would minimize that incentive. I also disagree, as Mr. Alex has referenced, the current the city requires a certain amount of parking spaces based on floor area ratio and number of bedrooms. From personal experience in living in the West Urbana area for the last more than a decade, I think that I've witnessed that requirement is too small, but I think those are two different issues. And that this issue, as was addressed with when 806 West Iowa was torn down, and the motion and the plan case that came out of that, or the motion to direct staff to initiate the plan case, was to get rid of to help preserve the neighborhoods, to help decrease or minimize the huge parking lots that I think all of us were afraid we would see, and that this amendment helps to minimize, again, that incentive to create more parking lots just for commercial use. That's why I support the proposed amendment.
If I could respond to that briefly, I don't think I ever said that I was in favor of creating parking lots for commuters. I think what I said is that I feel that the requirement that parking lots in residential areas serve residential uses within 600 feet is already sufficient to prevent that from happening, and in fact is advantageous in that it allows, for example, 3 lots which contain 2 apartment buildings and a parking lot in between to be legitimate under the zoning ordinance, as opposed to requiring that each of those 2 apartments have a parking lot in back with its own driveway and its own access and so forth. I mean, if there's something about the ordinance that you think enables, with or without the amendment, that enables a parking lot in a residential area to rent 40% of the spaces to commuters, I'm not aware of where that provision is. I think the requirement that these all be, that a parking lot located in one of these lower density residential districts be dedicated to residential use. I mean, that's where your 100% is. As far as I understand, that is 100%. My objection is the notion of saying that 90% of the spaces have to go with one building, as opposed to being able to say 50% of the spaces go with the building on one side of the parking lot and 50% of the spaces go to the other. And if I'm misinterpreting the amendment, please let me know.
Yeah, Ms. Matt?
It was, in the interest of efficiency, I put it together. It was an error to put these 2 together, because these are points 1 and 2 in this amendment are 2 different concepts. And maybe that, and I don't know if that's confusing Pete. Point 1 is the plan case should have required a special use permit anytime an entire lot is used as a parking lot and has no structure on it in a residential area. That's what I actually wanted to move on October 11th when we gave the direction, but I said, well, it's more complicated, let the staff look at it, so we made a motion that I thought was quite clear, saying that we, as Ms. Wein pointed out, that this is for limiting the impact of parking lots on residential neighborhoods, and what we got was a plan case that only dealt with the impact of parking lots on the house next door, not on the whole neighborhood. It's bad, and I think there are a lot of people, those who are still left in the room, who think it should be against the law to tear down a house and turn it into a parking lot in a residential neighborhood. Frankly, I wouldn't mind if it were against the law, but I don't think that would fly here, so a compromise is a special use permit. So if you're going to tear down a house, so that in some circumstances a council could decide it's not appropriate to make a parking lot there, or more likely what will happen is there will be a parking lot, but it's got to have something other than just pavement and yellow stripes. And right now, the city does not have the authority to regulate what a parking lot looks like if you tear down a house and turn it into a parking lot, no matter whose neighborhood it's in. Though it's much more likely to happen close to campus. So that is the intent, and so this within 600 feet in the first part is yet a compromise. And a compromise, say, okay, can we at least have, if it's real close to houses, that somebody look at it, that the city has the authority to say you have to put some bushes in, and that's basically all number one is. Number two is something different, and that's maybe what you're debating here, and that's what percent of a lot can be used for purpose other than serving the principal use. And while it sounds real neat that landlord Pat and landlord Wyman will just pull together and put in one lot to save space, that doesn't happen in Urbana, and I don't know if it happens anywhere. What really happens is, I've got this property, I'd like some extra spaces, but I can't fill the lot myself, and frankly, it's not worth it to me to tear down the house and have no improvement on the lot, just so I can get 5 more parking spaces for my apartment building. But she's got a place down the block, and she hasn't got enough parking for all her tenants. She has as much parking as Urbana law requires, but Urbana law does not require enough parking in apartment buildings. So I'll just tear down this house, make a parking lot, and rent it out to her tenants, and I'll make money. That's what number 2 is attempting to address.
I understand your explanation, and I would be supportive of the notion of requiring a special use permit if we could somehow describe what the circumstance was in ways that were compatible with the zoning ordinance. I'd be amenable to requiring a special use permit to permit basically creation of a parking lot that was only a parking lot instead of with no structure. I mean, I think that's something that's very appropriate, especially in some of these zones. I'm not sure this is the way to get at it, and I sympathize if the motion that you made wasn't what showed up at staff and wasn't what Plan Commission debated and so forth, but I think what I see here is basically saying that we're going to require, I think this is a considerable restriction in terms of how parking can be used, and not only, as I understand it, parking on a I see this as a unreasonable the 90% as an unreasonable restriction, that essentially even with a special use permit, and even subject to the special use permit process, you can't share a parking lot between multiple uses. And whether that's, Pat's building and Wyman's building, or Pat's building and Pat's building with a lot in between that's used for parking or partially used for parking, I think it's an unreasonable restriction, and I think that if we feel that the parking is insufficient, the parking requirements are insufficient, which incidentally I don't, because I think we're creating opposite incentives. I think we're saying we're trying to restrict parking and we're trying to require parking. But regardless of whether the parking is too much or too little, which I think we're on both sides of the fence. Yeah, it's both. I think that to say that we are going to, and I apologize for not having my thoughts together because I just saw this amendment, but I think the notion that even under the special use permit, we are not going to we're not going to allow the creative sharing of parking is bad, and I think that the notion that we think all these people ought to have more parking, we want to get the cars off the street, and we think that that it's bad that there's not enough parking, but at the same time, we don't think that you should be able to have parking lots. I mean, it's contradictory, and I think I like the special use permit process. I think it's perfectly reasonable to require that these sort of pseudo-accessory use, pseudo-principal use parking lots, if we can come up with a way to describe that, would be subject to a special use. But I think this 90% goes too far, and to some extent I think the 600 feet probably goes too far as well, and that it's considerably reaching across the zoning district boundaries. So I'm sympathetic, but I'm not convinced.
Okay, any further discussion, Ms. Chenoweth?
I just have a question to follow up with Mr. Alex's comments. If there was this situation that you referred to, which is an owner with a parking lot in the middle and 2 apartments on either side, and historically one apartment had used that and now they want both apartments to use it, would they be able to go to the city and ask for a major variance, or would that just not be permitted? I mean, is there a process other than the special use process? I guess I'm asking staff, there's a process other than the special use process by which they would ask for special consideration given a unique circumstance where a parking lot already existed and they happen to own both buildings on either side of it?
That's like a qualitative variance from the regulations of the zoning ordinance. We've had a few of those, and those are automatically major variances.
But there is a process, it's restrictive, but there is a process by which someone would, under unusual circumstances like the example Mr. Alex has given, would be able to come to the city and say, hey, I have a special circumstance here. Could I be considered for a major variance? No. Okay. Then I just have a comment, which is, having lived in this neighborhood since 1995, I support these amendments. First off, I think that it was the intention of council to talk about it as a residential neighborhood, and I distinctly remember that at the time being the discussion and it not necessarily being R2. The second issue has to do with maybe a aesthetic difference, which is, I think I represent people in my neighborhood when I say that people don't want centralized parking. And although there may be some nice smart growth pieces to the concept of centralized parking, and then the units around the centralized parking, generally speaking, that's not something that it's not something that my constituents would support. And I think it does, allowing for some kind of centralized or shared parking does provide an incentive to tear down homes. And we're in this situation where we're really doing everything possible in this community to try to save one of the few assets, one of the great assets that we have, which are these 100-year-old homes, which are being torn down at alarming rates, and this is one of the reasons why that's happening. So we have to, in some ways, I feel like there's never been the perfect tool for the job, and so we're kind of grasping at lots of different tools to figure out how can we respect property rights at the same time that we protect this important community asset. And I think that this does this. It is restrictive. I think we want it to be restrictive, and I think that there are ways to get around that under special circumstances, and I think that's appropriate. So I support the amendment.
Okay, anybody else for discussion? Mr. Hayes, if you take the chair for a minute. I think just speaking to the amendment, I think the amendment does serve a good purpose in that even with the 600 feet, and I understand Mr. Alex's concern of one zoning district stretching its influence over the zoning line to another, but in this case, it's just to do it to initiate a special use permit, not to change the zoning or something of that nature. And so I think it's appropriate to add a more of a distance than what came out of the Plan Commission. And practically speaking, with the 90%, is the 90% the right amount? Maybe it's a little too high, I don't know. But realistically speaking, I mean, apartment owners don't really come to us and ask for accessory parking lots. They put in the minimum amount of parking because it costs them more to put in parking. And so we're probably, I think it would be a rare, maybe you would call him an enlightened apartment owner that would go out of his way to create an accessory parking lot for the tenants. And we just, really don't see it happening too much. And so it seems to me that having an 80 or 90%, really isn't going to reduce the flexibility of people in the neighborhood. And if there is an occasion for shared use, that's a creative shared use, then we can work with those individuals and see if there's some way that we can come up with a plan to do that. So, I've lived in the neighborhood for an awful long time myself, and I enjoy the neighborhood, and I think probably the most compelling part of its charm and character is the nature of the houses themselves. It's not like a new subdivision where a lot of the houses look alike. Every house, in the entire neighborhood is different, and we don't want to encourage anything that would allow the destruction of a home simply to put up a parking lot. That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I'm in favor of the amendment and in favor of the main motion. Any other discussion on this is the amendment? Not all those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Let's see a show of hands, just make sure we got that right. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, opposed? Okay. Carries 5-2. Now the main motion. Any further discussion on the main motion? If not, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
Motion carries with 7 ayes. Next, we have item 300, new business, an ordinance approving a special use permit. This is to allow the installation of an equipment enclosure within 100 feet of a residential zone or land use at 809 West Illinois Street in Urbana's R4 medium-density multiple-family residential zoning district. This was Plan Case 1919-SU-04. Mr. Lindell?
Just to repeat, this request is by Singular Wireless for a special use permit to install an equipment enclosure in the R4 district that is not on an existing structure and is within 100 feet of a residential zone or land use. The equipment enclosure will serve a rooftop cell antenna at 809 West Illinois Street. A special use permit review is required for equipment enclosures only and not for the antenna itself. The zoning ordinance allows antennas on existing multifamily structures as an administratively approved use. At the January 20th public hearing, the Plan Commission voted unanimously to forward the case to City Council with a recommendation of approval. If we could have the Elmo now. Can show you the plat of the general area. This is Illinois Street. This is Lincoln Avenue. This property has two different buildings on it. This is 807 West Illinois Street. This is 809 West Illinois Street. The equipment enclosure would be at the southeast corner here of the 809 building. Part of it would be in between the buildings here, and part of it would be at the south edge of the building. Here's a bit of a closer look at the equipment enclosure. It runs about 24 feet north to south on the east side of the building, and I think it was about 15 feet on the south side of the building. The red line you see here is, can you see the red line? Is that, no? Okay.
Yeah.
It's the dark outline. That's the lease area. The three orange boxes are the locations of the equipment cabinets. They're about 5 feet tall, 3 feet deep, and 4 feet wide. Okay. One other thing I would say is this dark line here at the back, that would be cables for serving, running from the enclosures to the cables that run up to the rooftop antenna. This one would be above ground, and this other one is below ground. And there are other telecommunications cables that would also be located below ground. As I said, the equipment is about 4 feet wide, 5 feet tall by 3 feet deep. It's relatively compact and goes inside these three cabinets. The areas of the lease will cover part of the lawn, and 3 bushes are going to be removed. There's a correction to the memo. The petitioner had originally intended at one point to install a security fence surrounding the lease area. They have decided against that in consultation with the landowner. Evidently, the concerns were that there would be the potential for too much garbage to be tossed inside behind the fence, and for people to climb the fence, and other problems. And essentially, with these large steel cabinets, they're secure themselves, and the fence isn't really necessary. That's all for the AMO. At issue in the particular case is not the location or appropriateness of the antennas, but rather the appropriate location for an enclosure to contain the electrical equipment to service the antennas. Essentially, if the petitioner's equipment were located inside a multifamily building, on the roof of a building, or otherwise physically attached to the building, then under the provisions of the zoning ordinance, it would be permitted under administrative review along with the antenna. It's only because the equipment enclosures are being located on the ground here that the special use permit review is required. The equipment cabinets, again, they're not very large, perhaps refrigerator sized. It's similar in size to some types of mechanical equipment and enclosures commonly found in residential areas, such as air conditioners, garden sheds, or trash dumpster enclosures. And basically, these enclosures do not have the drawbacks of those. They do not make any noise, they do not emit odors, and they do not have regular vehicle visits at 5 in the morning. The requirements for a special use permit: that the proposed use is conducive to the public convenience at that location. This use is conducive to public convenience because it would facilitate operation of cell telephone service to residential and business customers in the area. Secondly, that the proposed use is designed, located, and proposed to be operated so that will not be unreasonably injurious or detrimental to the district in which it's located. It should not pose a detriment to the district or to the adjoining properties. The addition of the cabinets will not have a significant visual impact on the neighbors to the south, and it will not be visible from other locations. The equipment is similar in size to some types of mechanical equipment and enclosures, and the cabinets, again, will not generate noise, traffic, or any other influence that other equipment like air conditioners or dumpsters could. Third, that the proposed use conforms to the applicable regulations and standards of and preserves the essential character of the district. An equipment enclosure is permitted as a special use in the R4 medium density multiple family zoning district. This facility, the enclosures, is designed to meet the applicable regulations and standards of the Urbana Building Safety Division. Should the special use permit be granted, the petitioner will be required to obtain a building permit to erect the equipment enclosures, and the building permit application will be reviewed to demonstrate complete compliance with provisions of the special use permit as well as all other applicable codes and ordinances. This actually basically summarize the findings. The options of the City Council: to approve the special use permit request, to approve the special use permit with any additional conditions deemed appropriate or necessary for public health, safety, welfare, or to carry out the purposes of the zoning ordinance, or to deny the special use permit. Based on the evidence presented in discussion above and at the previous Plan Commission public hearing, the Plan Commission recommends that City Council approve the proposed special use permits in Plan Case 1919 SU04 for the reasons articulated above, and with these conditions: number one, that the construction location and orientation of the equipment enclosure shall be in general conformance to the site plan submitted with a petition and attached hereto, that the top of the antenna shall not extend beyond 35 feet above ground level, that the equipment enclosures shall not encroach into the existing sidewalk or bicycle parking areas, and number three, that the petitioner submits an updated site plan showing the changed location of the cable tray, and that the new plan substantially maintain the site planning elements shown on the plans presented. Any questions, please?
Thank you. Was there notice given to tenants in the building who's, particularly the one who's outside whose apartment these things are going to be standing?
No, I do not believe that we sent notice to occupants at either of the buildings. We did send it to the owner of the building.
Right. How close, well, the owner is a participant in this endeavor, yes?
That's correct.
That's right, okay, yeah. How close to, those 3 boxes are going to be outside the bedroom and living room windows of one of the apartments. How close to the window will these refrigerator-sized things be?
We could have the Elmo again, please. Oh, okay. Could I have the Elmo, please? Okay, if I can see.
4 feet off the wall.
2 feet.
They call it 2 feet?
We've got the measurement right here. 2 feet from the space between the window or between the wall to the cabinet.
Wow. Does that meet fire safety requirements?
This cabinet is not actually directly in front of the window, and although there was a box here that's more like 3 feet away, our building safety inspector has had a quick look at the plans, and his first impressions were that this did meet building safety requirements, in particular because this window actually already has an air conditioner in it, so it's not an egress window, although I believe this other one actually is. And then again, there's also windows here that are immediately kind of behind the stairwell, which is also only about 2.5 feet. Oh, sorry.
Where is it?
There's windows right here. So if in the event, once we kind of get down to brass tacks and a building inspector takes a closer look at it and he decides that there is no fire egress out of this basement apartment, because of the location of these cabinets, it will not happen.
Question, is that, I'm sorry, did
If you have any more questions?
No, that's just my main concern. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I was just going to follow up on that. Is that box, can you slide that over again? Is that, there's 3 cabinets, and then to the north, or to the, above the top cabinet, is that no, I keep going around.
There's 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I keep going up, that.
Right there.
Is that actually on the ground, or is that under the ground?
That's on the ground.
How big is that?
We'll have to ask the petitioners.
Okay, I thought that was actually, there was a note of an underground junction box, and I thought that was actually what that north box was.
There'll be, well, I can answer that for you. There'll be a post coming out of the cabinet. That's a telephone box right there. So then that'll be on a pole, which the wires will run through the pole into the ground over to meet the telephone.
So that box is actually in the design. There's a shown as telco junction box, which is shown as a buried fiberglass, like a coffin style box. Is that what that is, or is that?
It's not buried. That will be above ground. I'm pretty sure that's above ground.
Oh, okay. I had this. Yeah, the one that's shown here sure looks like a buried one.
C5.
Refer you to sheet C5. Because I had the same concern about that being in front of a window, and then it looked like it was more of a manhole.
So let me keep going. Actually, that showed it looked like it was sitting on the ground.
Yeah.
No, so it's tiny. Okay. This is C5. By the way, this is Mike Doran. He is representative of Singular. And this is the telecommunications junction box. It's Exhibit C5 in their plans. And its dimensions are, what? Up to 30 feet.
Okay.
Do you know which size it
Sometimes
is?
they come off the side, sometimes
Yeah.
they go down.
Do you know which one it is? These different sizes?
I don't.
Okay.
I really don't.
But it won't be blocking the window because it'll be at ground level.
Pardon me?
It won't be blocking the window because it'll be at ground level.
It'll be, yeah,
Okay.
flush.
Yes, is this the same thing that is mounted on a cell phone tower? Is this cellular antenna the same kind of thing that ends up being mounted on a tower, except in this case it's mounted on a roof?
Yes,
Okay.
antennas.
And is it, does it give off some kind of radiation?
Well, it does, but we're not allowed to discuss that in these forums. It's just, it's a kind of, I hate to be, it's a federal law that says we're not allowed, you're not allowed to ask the question, we're not allowed to address it. I mean, it's from the Telecommunications Act of 1996.
Yeah,
But
well,
to
that was an
answer-
extremely poor act, but,
No, but I'm just, I mean, that's, I'll answer the question the
Okay.
best I can. We're surrounded by we're surrounded by frequencies. I mean, we're all over the place. What telecom has done is learned how to tweak them and make them fit. You know, they go like, so do they radiate? They do, but do they, to what degree, I don't know. I mean,
so you're not familiar if there's any kind of shield underneath this particular antenna that would protect the heads of the people who live in the apartment right below where the antenna will be mounted, for example? You're not familiar with the equipment such that you don't know whether or not there's a shield of sorts?
There's a shield that goes over it, but whether it shields frequencies, I can't address that.
Let me ask a question to our staff. Do we regulate the height of cell phone, cellular antennas, or radio transmitters over a certain wattage, or other kinds of things that might have a lot of, I'm missing the word here, whatever word we were just using, it's getting late, but basically radiation, yes, thank you. Radiation, that's a question for our staff.
I think I do not recall seeing that anywhere in the zoning ordinance, other than to say that antennas would have to meet all FCC regulations.
I can answer that. We do in our zoning ordinance have provisions in there that regulate the height of these basically cell tower types of things, but not specifically any device that emits radiation. With respect to the comment that was made that we're not allowed to ask and this gentleman's not allowed to answer, I don't think that's quite correct. I think what is correct is that we are preempted by the Federal Telecommunications Act of 1996 from imposing any additional radiation requirements that are locally oriented or that are different from what the feds have. We are allowed to require the telecom providers to show. We are allowed to require them to show that they meet the federal radiation emission requirements, but we're not allowed to take any independent enforcement action of our own or set additional standards.
Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. Roberts?
Who does this cellular tower serve? Is this cellular tower on this building and these three boxes serving just the tenants within this building?
No.
This is serving a larger area, isn't it?
Yes.
And so why are they positioned somehow, or why was this one building chosen as the site for this installation?
The university is across the street.
And so it's by mere convenience that you've arranged with the apartment owner to put this on the roof?
Could you repeat that?
So that it's merely by the convenience of this building near the university as being a fortuitous location that you've chosen this particular building to establish this communication center?
No, actually, the RF, singular RF, the radio frequency person who decides where they need coverage, and then he would give me a ring, and I go out and canvass the area to find out if there's any buildings that meet that requirement or meet those specifications, and if there's a willing landowner, then I would negotiate a lease with them.
So there's some kind of financial benefit for establishing these antennae and the boxes on the roof of this building for the landlord.
We rent space.
You rent the space. And that's why they're crammed here between the two buildings in an available location that requires an ordinance variance?
That's where we could put the equipment.
That's the only place you could find to put the equipment.
Correct.
Are these 3 units heavy?
Probably 1,000 pounds apiece.
So you couldn't, by right, they could be on the roof because you wouldn't require zoning.
Structurally, we didn't think the roof could handle it structurally.
Well, I would agree with you probably, but I'm just thinking that.
If we could put them on the roof, we'd rather have them on the roof.
Because you wouldn't require you to come here to ask for it, right? Because there wouldn't be any special permit required.
No. I mean, if they could go on the roof, we'd put them on the roof. If they needed to be on the ground, we'd put them on the ground.
But this unit could be could be almost anywhere in this neighborhood if you could find a person who would put it.
We did try to relocate this particular site, and just because it was crowded, and we thought we could find a better location, but there wasn't one. And RF said we gave him different coordinates from different locations. He said, we've been working on this site for about 8 months now, and we're at this stage. But when we went in with the new coordinates, when I went in with the new coordinates, he kept coming back saying, no, that's too far away. It's too far away.
To serve the university, the dormitories?
Well, the university it'll serve the whole area. I'd say, you asked why, and the university's across the street. If I were to say, because of the neighborhood behind, we service the whole area, but the main focus is the university. I mean, that is the main focus, but everybody will...
But everybody benefits.
Everybody, the whole neighborhood benefits.
Mr. Boylan?
How tall is this antenna?
It is 6 feet.
What?
6 foot antenna.
6 foot on top of the building?
Correct.
Does all of these tubes, conduits go up through the building?
No, they'll run on a track on the side of the building.
Side of the building? And then across the roof?
Across the roof.
Are there any microwaves involved?
No.
No microwaves?
No microwaves.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? If not, a motion would be in order.
I move ordinance number 2005-02-018, an ordinance approving a special use permit to allow the installation of an equipment enclosure within 100 feet of a residential zone or land use at 809 West Illinois Street in Urbana's R4 medium density multiple family residential zoning district, that is plan case number 1919-SU-04.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Yes, Mr. Alex.
How many parking spaces are we going to require?
I was going to bring that up myself and say 0. But
0 parking spaces. Okay. Ms. Pat.
I spoke with, very briefly with, though I wasn't even clear on where these refrigerator-sized things are going, but with the tenant in that particular apartment, and I guess he doesn't have an objection to it, but I'm going to vote for this, but I want to ask our staff, and hopefully this will just be done and not we have to have a motion or an ordinance to do it. Anytime something like this is affecting, or when you talk about putting up something 5 feet tall outside someone's home at the distance that is closer than the edge of our desk here is to us, the tenants should be notified too, and we should have the opportunity to have input from the people who are affected by it, and not just do it and not worry about it. So I hope that in the future that will happen if more of these are going to be placed around by whatever companies, and we're talking about putting them in apartment or by apartment buildings, that we recognize that the people in the apartment buildings are people too, and that they should get notice.
Any other discussion? Yes, Ms. Wyman?
Yeah, I am supporting, well, I made the motion, support the ordinance, but I too am concerned that it seems like too many times we'll come across changes in, well, for special use permits or for other zoning issues where we find that the property owner, who may live in Michigan or Indiana or some other place, is notified about a change that will affect the property, but the person living there is not notified. And I do think that it's really important to do so, and to make sure that, again, if need be, you know, in the next couple of weeks, maybe we need to bring forth an ordinance change that requires that notice. I know staff often does take extra caution and extra time to notify the residents who will be directly impacted by various changes. If the city only had one tenant in the entire city who were renting, I would say it was important. The fact that over half of the residents of the city of Urbana are tenants, and so could perhaps be left out of any sort of notification of changes, whether it's special use or other issues, I think is especially important to recognize. And so I think that though that issue isn't affecting this vote, because the tenant, as Ms. Pat spoke to and has spoken about, knows about this change and doesn't have an issue with it, I think it's important that we make sure that no other tenants or other residents who are directly affected by our zoning proposals or changes are left out in the cold. Thank you.
Any other discussion, Mr. Whalen?
I'm just thinking, if this is so beneficial to the university, I could appreciate a cell being located in the proper place, because I have certain places in my neighborhood where the cell doesn't seem to exist, where the phone will drop calls. But in any case, if it's so important to the university, why isn't it put on a university building? Why isn't it put on a university building?
The university has an unfortunate position when it comes. Their feeling is if they allow one carrier, although they did allow Verizon, we're on that tower too, and that's 2 blocks away. If that gives you any indication as to the demand of what's going on there.
This is Florida Avenue.
Right, we're on that one. You know, just the Maryland, isn't it? Yeah.
Maryland, Florida.
But we're also on that tower, and we're 2 blocks away. We're investing money in this particular location too. But they won't allow it. They just don't. Well, same way in Bloomington.
The university doesn't allow a lot of things. For one thing, they don't allow is us to tax them when they take properties off the tax rolls. There's a parking building on University Avenue, which I've noticed now the ground floor is all offices, could have been retail space. They've taken that off the tax rolls, and so I'm not terribly sensitive to the university's concern about that. I think that this can have a negative aesthetic appearance in the neighborhood because of the tubing, the conduit, the antenna, and I personally don't think that that's going to really improve the appearance of the neighborhood, which we all like to preserve, our 100-year-old homes and the appearance of them, in spite of the fact that these are apartment houses. But I'm saying I would think that you say the university just won't accept it. Hell with them. Push it. But I can't. I'm not going to approve this personally.
For further discussion, Mr. Roberts.
I would just feeling that it's possible that the tenant who lives who's going to be looking out his window at this the back of this unit for the next 2 years until he graduates or whatever doesn't care about it, but this unit's going to be there for the duration of the building or until the phone company changes hands or goes out of bankrupt or whatever. But the next tenant may have a bit different feeling about it, or I suppose nobody would take the apartment if they really objected.
Guess what?
It's kind of an odd thing. I think I have doubts about this myself. I think it's kind of an inopportune location, and we rationalize a lot of things as well. Okay, this happened, and we don't really like it, but it won't hurt anybody. I think maybe sometimes we have to draw a line. I'm not real, I'm not disposed to be in favor of it.
Okay, any other discussion? Mr. Hayes, you take the chair. Well, I know that when we dealt with locating these towers some years ago when they were first being proliferated, we dealt with the issues of, cell phone companies wanting the towers in residential areas and talked a lot about what would be the least amount of impact. And actually, as I recall, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but towers that are on top of taller buildings, or where this is going to be a 6-foot tall thing on top of a building, of a 3-story building, is relatively low impact for the neighborhood. And what we didn't want to see was freestanding towers in residential neighborhoods, and so our ordinance is geared to promote this type of location rather than a freestanding tower with freestanding boxes beside it and taking up a whole lot or a part of a lot. So, we did struggle with this quite a bit, and I think we were one of the communities that dealt with this when there were first the proliferation of these cell towers. Knowing that they were going to come, I think we did the best job that we could in trying to minimize their impact. We try to encourage them on governmental buildings in commercial areas and so forth, but we did recognize that there were going to be some that were located in residential areas, and when they are located in residential areas, we want to make sure that they're as least obtrusive as possible, and I think this does a pretty good job of that. A 6-foot tower on top of the roof is not all that great of an impact, and some of these utility boxes, although they may be as big as a refrigerator or something, they're not. I mean, we see telephone boxes throughout residential neighborhoods that are very comparable to this size. So I don't think the impact to the neighborhood is going to be that great, and could be a lot worse if it were something that were freestanding. So I think this is something we ought to support. Yeah. Okay. Any other discussion? If there's no other discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Chenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
No.
Mr. Whalen?
No.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
That motion carries with 5 ayes. And let's see, finally tonight, almost finally, we have a couple of appointments to various boards and commissions. And you can see I've made a couple of recommendations, one to the Champaign County Housing Authority Board, and that is Janice Mitchell. She's currently an access clinician at the Champaign County Mental Health Center, position she's held since 2003. She got her Master's of Arts from the University of Chicago, the School of Social Service Administration, and a bachelor's degree from Southern University A&M College. She's been a resident of Urbana 16 years, and her term would expire June 30th, 2006. This is the unexpired term left by Pat Stebbins' resignation. And just to point out to you, this 111 South Dodson is not in the city, but it's just outside the city. But there's no requirement in the appointment process that all of our appointees to the Housing Authority must live within the city limits. The other is to the Human Relations Commission, Mr. Daniel Larson of 708 East Oregon. He's currently a grad student and teaching assistant at the U of I in speech communication and verbal communication. He received his bachelor's and master's from the U of I and is currently working on his PhD. He's a lifelong resident of Urbana, 27 years, and has been an active volunteer in the community. His term, if he's approved, would expire June 30th, 2007. Yes, Ms. Wyman?
Mayor, as you know, before the meeting, I asked you for the phone number of one of the commission members because we couldn't find that in the phone book. I'm wondering, I'd like to ask for the indulgence to postpone the consideration of these mayoral appointments so that I and others who couldn't find this individual's phone number can have a chance to contact this individual and then the other who I simply haven't had a chance to talk with before we vote.
That's no problem. So you just want to, is there any objection to moving these off for 2 weeks?
Thank you.
Would be helpful.
Okay. Well, we can do that. We'll just see these in 2 weeks then, and I'm sure I've got a phone number. So I'll get, anybody that wants contact information can get a hold of me. So we'll see these in 2 weeks' time. Finally, I would entertain a motion to go into closed session to discuss pending litigation.
I move that the council go into closed session for the purpose of discussing pending litigation.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Alex?
Yes.
Ms. Shenoweth?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes? Ms. Pat?
Yes.
Mr. Roberts?
Yes.
Mr. Whalen?
Yes.
Ms. Wyman?
Yes.
That motion carries.